Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program. We're reading today from a book by Four Arrows, also known as Donald Jacobs or Don Jacobs. It's titled Point of Departure, Returning to Our More Authentic Worldview for Education and Survival. This is from Chapter 3, Community-Oriented Self-Authorship. Knowing the power of intentional and unintentional trance-based learning and how the latter can make us susceptible to believing untoward communication from authority figures, we can understand one reason self-authorship is important in the indigenous worldview. When we are in control of our thinking and trust our intuitive insights, our natural trance awareness helps prevent misdirection from external influences. It gives us the authority for what we can then instill in our minds to achieve. If someone such as a trusted shaman or psychologist has, certain skills at hypnosis, we might tentatively authorize him or her to help us form the most effective images, but we do so with full awareness. More important than avoiding negative influence from perceived authority figures, however, is the self-authorship via indigenous worldview that gives high degrees of individual autonomy to people while at the same time assuring that people use their freedoms to help their communities. In the indigenous worldview, the highest authority for all decisions comes from one's personal, honest reflection on lived experience, with the understanding that everything is related. It is this understanding that makes a distinction between self-authorship, as it is generally perceived in the dominant worldview, and that of the indigenous one. Self-authorship is always ultimately in the service of the greater good in the latter. Self-authorship in indigenous ways of thinking comes from knowing that the highest experience for decisions comes from honest reflection on lived experience in light of realizing that everything is related in life, and this interconnectedness must be a part of all decisions. Michael Anthony Hart gets to these ideas about inner authority coming from such reflection. Through inward exploration, tapping into creative forces that run through all life, individuals come to subjectively experience a sense of wholeness. This exploration is an experience in context, where the context is the self in connection with happenings, and the findings from such experience is knowledge. Happenings may be facilitated through rituals or ceremonies that incorporate dreaming, visioning, meditation, and prayer. The findings from such experiences are encoded in community praxis as a way of synthesizing knowledge derived from introspection. Hence, indigenous peoples' cultures recognize and affirm the spiritual through practical applications of inner space. Such a holistic understanding of accessing, trusting, and exercising our inner authority is the source of the creativity and knowledge synthesis we need for addressing our global problems. While Ehrman refers to this inner authority with the Cree term mamatawisin, which is the capacity to tap the creative life forces of the inner space by the use of all the faculties that consume our being, it is to exercise inwardness. This understanding is missing from our dominant worldview, where objective-based outward exploration is sought for guidance rather than introspective knowledge development. Dependence on external authority is the rule in spite of the call to question authority that has always resonated on the fringes. Under the dominant worldview, obedience trumps community-oriented self-authorship. Decision-making is rarely a holistic process, nor does it utilize alternative states of awareness, deep reflection, and community praxis. The random quotations below, selected from an internet search, reveal that obedience to authority is common under the dominant worldview. Obedience to lawful authority is the foundation of manly characteristics by Robert E. Lee. All religions have based morality on obedience, Alexander Herzen. Obedience brings peace in decision-making, James Faust. Justice is the insurance that we have on our lives and property. Obedience is the premium we pay for it, William Penn. I was not born to be free. I was born to adore and obey, C.S. Lewis. Every game has rules. Life's a game that has its respective rules. Obey the rules, win the game, Israel Ahavor. A wolf cannot have more than one head, or it tears itself apart, Con Iggulden. From a social dissident on the fringe, Noam Chomsky wrote, any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. From an indigenous-raised Lakota, Oyesa, the American Indian was an individualist in religion as in war. Reliance on external authority is not only the bedrock of choices in mainstream society and the main approach to moral development, but it also gives guides jurisprudence and conflict resolution. Authorized punishment or revenge is a primary goal for wrongdoing. Under indigenous worldview, bringing offenders back into community via affected members of the community is the goal. This relational approach expands the circle of land and seeks input from the wide circle of relevant people. Spiritual resources are employed via prayer or song, and subjectivity is as important as objectivity. Hart emphasizes this relationship as emphasizing spirit and spirituality, and in turn, a sense of communitism and respectful individualism. And then he goes on about the indigenous worldview and how it relates to what we would call communism. Point of Departure by Four Arrows.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Hey, happy post-Christmas, pre-New Year's Eve. Boy, is there a pile of news. By the way, the second hour of our program today, for the entire hour, Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us taking your calls, your opportunity to lobby one of the top two progressives in Congress. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, along with Pramila Jayapal, who we're going to start getting on the program more often. Sean, I think that would be a good thing. We have learned that, there's a bunch of stuff that I want to get to today. The main story I want to talk about in this first hour is how what Donald Trump is doing with the Veterans Administration and what And what Gaius, what was his last name? No, it wasn't Gaius Publius. He's our writer friend. Gaius Gracchus, Tiberius Gracchus and Gaius Gracchus. What they did to the Roman Empire is the same. It's an amazing story, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute. In fact, I want to make that the kind of the main focus of this hour, but there is just like so much in the news that I just want to touch on real quickly, and we can get into in more detail as time goes on. And by the way, we're calling this anything goes end of year week. So, pretty much anything you want to talk about, feel free to give us a call. First of all, the story that is being played in the press about Donald Trump's phone call with a 7-year-old over the weekend. He and Melania were manning the phones with NORAD, where little kids can call and say, "Where's Santa's reindeer?" And Santa and his reindeer. And NORAD says, "Well, it looks like they're coming over Boston right now." So he got this little girl, Coleman Lloyd, 7-year-old girl, on the phone and told her that he thought it was only marginal for a girl who was 7 years old to believe in Santa Claus. Now, everybody is like, "Oh my God, Donald Trump is trying to ruin Christmas." I don't think that's the big story, and I think everybody else has missed the big story. And this is what kind of blows my mind, frankly. The big story is that Donald Trump, being a malignant narcissist, being the center of his own movie, being the only person in the universe who is a real person who actually feels emotions, Donald Trump doesn't understand appropriate behavior. Literally doesn't understand appropriate behavior. He doesn't know when it's time to say something and time to not say something. And the consequence of that is not, the horrible consequence of that is not, for us as a country, is not that he's blowing up Santa for 7-year-olds. It's that when Erdogan gets him on the phone, the dictator of Turkey, and says, I want to slaughter the Kurds in northern Syria. Will you please get out of the way so that I can do this? Trump goes, "Okay, they're yours," without even a thought. Right? This is a symptom of something much, much larger. Meanwhile, we just learned that indeed Donald Trump got his bone spurs from a doctor who was renting his office and apartment. In fact, 2 doctors renting their offices and apartments from his dad, Fred. Apparently it was a favor, this over at the New York Times. A second child in the last couple days has, this time an 8-year-old boy from Guatemala, has died in our custody. Donald Trump and Kirstjen Nielsen now have, I believe it's over 30 deaths on her watch. This is Felipe Alonso Gomez. He died hours before Christmas. He died on Christmas Eve. And then back on December 8th, Jacqueline Cal McKean, also of Guatemala, died after fewer than 48 hours in ICE custody. Here in Portland, the national tradition is continuing. Jermaine Massey, young African-American guy, lives up in Washington State. He'd never been to Portland before. He came down to see Travis Scott play at the Moda Center and was staying at the Doubletree Hotel in the Lloyd District. He'd already checked in. His stuff was in his room. He came back from the concert, noticed on his phone that his mother had called, and it was kind of late back east, so he decided he'd give her a shout before he got up to the hotel room. So he sat down in the lobby to call his mom, and they called the police on him. Yep, talking on the phone while black. Meanwhile, the Saudis have apparently successfully gotten one of their guys out, 21 years old, Abdul Rahman Samir Noura, 21, is accused of killing Fallon Smart, 15, of Portland, Oregon. He's been missing for a year, this guy who killed this little kid. It was a hit and run, apparently a drunken hit and run. And now Saudi Arabia has notified the Portland police, yeah, we got him out of the country. Apparently they got him a phony passport and put him on a private plane. Moral of the story, if you're Saudi and rich, not to worry. There's no extradition treaty with Saudi Arabia. And we're discovering why Donald Trump doesn't want interest rates to go up. Deutsche Bank holds a bunch of loans that all, Trump's interest payments go up when the interest rates go up. He owes $50 million on the Trump Tower in Chicago. It's prime minus 0.5%. He owes over $50 million in the old post office in Washington. That's prime plus 2%. Oh, my God. And the Trump National Doral in Miami, he owes over $50 million, and it's prime minus 0.75. And that's just the stuff that we know about because Deutsche Bank has revealed it. And last little head-scratching thing, and then I'm going to get into this whole privatization rant, which, like I said, I really want to make the focus of this hour. Jerry Falwell Jr. has engaged in what, according to the Miami New Times, is an exceedingly odd business deal. I mentioned this last week very briefly, but the story has gotten much more bizarre and much larger. He and his wife were staying at the Fontainebleau. They met this 21-year-old pool boy. And suddenly, Falwell Jr., they welcomed the pool attendant into their lives, began flying him around on a private jet, and put up millions of dollars to help his business ventures. He didn't even have any business ventures before Jerry Falwell decided that he was going to be best buds with this young man, shall we say. They bought a building for $1.8 million and gave part of it to the pool boy, along with a 120-bed hostel where beds cost $20 a night. What's that about? The deal was set up by Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's lawyer. Oh, really? Was the pool boy? And Falwell put $800,000 into renovations for this property. There's something going on here. And nobody's willing to say it out loud. And I'm not going to say it out loud. I'll just let you scratch your head and wonder what the heck is going on. But apparently, right after Falwell's first encounters with the pool boy in Miami, he, quote, told Granda to search for a profitable business idea and promised that he would purchase, finance, or establish this business for him. The Falwells had bought the property for $4.65 million, and he is now one of the owners, the pool boy. Something strange. Okay, let me get to the Roman Republic, the fall of the Roman Republic. This is absolutely fascinating stuff. I did as one of our book reports a week or two ago, Mortal Republic by Edward J. Watts. The subtitle is How Rome Fell into Tyranny. And basically, it boils down to this. These two, quote, populists, Tiberius Gracchus and his younger brother Gaius, who, in the later years of the Roman Empire were the emperors. And their big contribution to Roman history is that they privatized the Roman military. Now, by the late 2nd century BC, by that time, the army had essentially been privatized. Now, prior to this, in the early days of the Republic, soldiers thought of their participation in military service as a civic duty, writes Yashe Monk in the book review over in the New York Times today, which is how soldiers think of service to America right now, unless they happen to work for Blackwater. So once the army was privatized, what happened was, and I quote from the review, commanders knew that the plunder of new lands could garner them vast riches. Soldiers signed up for the ride in the hope of gaining, generously. With soldiers increasingly loyal to their commanders and commanders doing whatever it took to maximize the prospect of private profit, the Senate, in other words, the government of Rome, was no longer in charge. Thus, the Roman Empire collapsed. It was privatization. Now, meanwhile, we learned this also from the New York Times, this from back in November, in the final months of the Obama, hang on just a second, this is the wrong story. The other thing that we learned is that where did that go? Okay, well, the bottom line here is that the Trump administration, here it is. The VA was taken advantage of by paying billions in fees, Secretary says. It's called the Veterans Choice Program. And, to cut Trump a little slack, this was actually rolled out during the Obama administration, another brilliant neoliberal idea. Let's privatize the VA. But the two companies who were hired to run the program, they have taken 24% of all the cash, $2 billion in fees. One of the two big companies, I don't know if it's worse, but TriWest Healthcare Alliance, despite a criminal investigation of the company for wire fraud and misused government funds, is handling billions of dollars of your tax money. Senator John Tester of Montana says if it costs more to be in the private sector, if administration costs are higher, benefits are going to be cut. Yeah. So here we see how privatization of the military took down the Roman Empire. And Trump is now aggressively privatizing our Veterans Administration. And in fact, it's gone on steroids since the Obama administration handed this program off to them. Meanwhile, they're not cracking down on corporate crime. In fact, au contraire, in the final months of the Obama administration, Walmart was under pressure from federal officials to pay nearly $1 billion and accept a guilty plea for a bribery investigation. Barclays owed $7 billion. Royal Bank of Scotland was in a criminal investigation. After President Trump took office, they looked to his administration for a more sympathetic ear and got one, writes Ben Protest in the New York Times. Across the corporate landscape, the Trump administration has presided over a sharp decline in financial penalties against banks and big companies accused of malfeasance. They are, as they say, giving away the store. 62% drop in penalties imposed, 62% drop in illicit profits ordered returned, 72% decline in corporate penalties from criminal prosecutions. And while the SEC ordered banks to pay $1.7 billion during the Obama period, that's 4 times as much as during the same 2 years in the Trump era. Trump only brought 17 cases against the banksters. Obama brought 71. The headline, Trump administration spares corporate wrongdoers billions in penalties.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So when are we going to wake up to how privatization of things that should be the commons end up inevitably screwing us and risk the republic? And welcome back. Chris in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom. I didn't know about that Saudi Arabian guy in Portland. I wonder if the local right-wing host, I won't say his name up there, is going to bring that up. I doubt he's not, but of course, if it were an illegal alien, boy, he would be all over that.
Yeah.
So, but, something just dawned on me while you were talking about the privatization agenda, and especially Eric Prince, having some sway, obviously, in, like, Trump's ear. If we went, this purist ideology of the Second Amendment guys, there are some libertarians that say we should be able to own a surface-to-air missile. If corporations and individuals were able to buy these type of weapons, do you think we could see a return to Pinkerton-style policing? Because now they have access to what police departments have, and that could be a double-edged sword.
That's it writ small, Chris, yes. Writ large, look at the U.S. forces in Iraq. Right now we're down, our soldiers, in quotes, are down to basically just supporting the local Iraqi military. We do airstrikes. And same thing we're doing in Syria. We've only had 4 fatalities in 2 years in Syria because the Kurds, thousands and thousands of Kurdish soldiers have died. They have been fighting on our behalf. Well, in Iraq, the ones fighting on our behalf, in addition to the Iraqi army, are Blackwater and, what's now, they've got another name now, but and several other private military forces. So we've privatized our military, which makes them invisible. And we don't know how much they're doing what the Roman army did, that is plundering and looting for their own benefit. But they're certainly plundering and looting us. We're paying a couple $100,000 per soldier per year for these guys, whereas a regular GI costs us about $30,000 a year at, entry level. And so the question, Chris, is if this policy that we have put into place in Iraq and Afghanistan and perhaps in other parts of the world, most of this stuff is classified and we just don't know the details. But if this policy of privatizing our military comes home and we see the privatization of our police departments, then I think it's very, very possible that the scenario that you're talking about, this really a bizarre Blade Runner scenario might end up being played out here in the United States. What do you think?
Yeah, no, but then I feel like it could easily be sold because for some reason, generally, even though Bernie Sanders sits as the chair of the Veterans Committee, but generally conservatives and Republicans are seen as
that was back for what, only a year or so, the first 2 years of the Obama administration. When the Democrats controlled the Senate. Bernie hasn't been running the VA, the Veterans Affairs Committee, for a while.
Okay, well, I mean, but we need to have this meme. I feel like Sammy Duckworth and the gal over in I'm trying to remember her name, in Hawaii, the representative over there.
Yeah.
Really great progressive lady. She's also a vet. But
Tulsi
Democrats
Gabbard?
need to. Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard. The Democrats need to be the party of veterans and the military, because I feel like conservatives and libertarians and Republicans will sell a privatization effort, and pro-military people will be for it because generally they identify with conservatives and it would be an easy sell.
Yeah, yeah. That said, pandering to the military, or pandering, period, is always a very, very dangerous path. We need to be engaging in policy based on what's the best thing for the country, not, what's going to win elections. But your points, Chris, are all very well made. Chris, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And so what's the price Americans pay for privatization of the commons? Possibly the destruction of our republic. Certainly the looting of our republic. I mean, we've been seeing that under Republican presidencies since Reagan. Back in the 1920s, we saw it under Republican presidencies like Harding and Coolidge in particular, the whole Teapot Dome scandal. Hey, we've got this big gas reserve out in Wyoming. Let's just give it to Albert Fall, the Secretary of the Navy. Wouldn't that be nice? It's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. But anyhow, Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, what's on your mind today?
Tom, thank you so much for taking my call. I think the price is going to be destruction of our democracy, where basically there will be no rules or law. And I think one of the reasons why we need to do is get rid of the Citizen United. That should be the first thing we eliminate. Yeah, but the new name for the Blackwater is called Z, and that's the new name of the Blackwater. And the Eric Prince, I don't know if you remember, in the beginning of the year, that's what he was advocating for, privatizing the war in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And I think Trump, by withdrawing all the troops, trying to replace them with private military. That's really, I think, his intention, where he can profit from it.
I think he's already done it to some extent, and he's. I mean, it was during George W. Bush, actually, even before Obama, that Blackwater started providing military services in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I'm sure that they have been doing it all along. I mean, this is a huge honeypot for Eric Prince.
Sure. During the Iraq War, Eric Prince lived pretty much in the White House. He was there spending every night. But what I wanted to call about is, Tom, if you look at throughout the history, going back to Clinton, he ran as an outsider from Hope, Arkansas. Mm-hmm. Same thing, Bush ran as from Austin, Texas. Barack Obama said, I'm different, I'm new, I'm not from Washington. Trump, same thing. He ran as an outsider. I really think for us to get someone in the White House in 2020, he has to be an outsider. And Beto O'Rourke is the best person. He's an outsider. He needs to get on the road now as far as campaigning and talking to people in the Midwest and then in the Rust Belt area, about kitchen table issues.
He is. I mean, he's clearly running for president. He's getting himself in the news. I mean, he was in headlines this morning in both the Washington Post and the New York Times. He's definitely out there. And the war has begun. I mean, the serious war on the left. And Joe Biden, we're not hearing so much from, but the three top polling Democrats right now for president, and this far out, it's meaningless. But the three top Democrats polling for president right now are Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Beto O'Rourke. And so David Sirota, who used to be Bernie's, I don't think he was chief of staff, but he played a prominent role in Bernie's. Say what?
Campaign, yeah.
Communications director, that's right. Has written a couple of pieces over the last few days, basically just scorching Beto, saying that he's a new Dem and he's not progressive and he supports corporatization and blah-de-blah-de-blah. I've read them. I can't dispute them. On the other hand, I think it's entirely possible that people can change. And so I just don't know. I don't know. But I think your point that an outsider is, Obama ran as an outsider. Really, I think that the outsiders have been dominating In 2000, George W. Bush ran as an outsider. You know, he was just the governor of Texas. You know, not from Washington D.C. And then of course Obama and then Trump. I mean, you know, Trump ran as an outsider. So I think that you're onto something, Omar. And I suspect, but on the other hand, I think that Bernie is also perceived as an outsider. Joe Biden, of course, is the ultimate insider, which I think is going to work to his detriment. I really don't think he's got a chance, but we'll see. We'll see. Omar, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's post-Christmas, pre-New Year's. What's on your mind? Anything goes week. And then, as I said, the next hour, Mark Pocan will be with us. Stick around. For our book today, we're reading from Elon Papp's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. This is from the preface. It's titled The Red House. The Red House was a typical early Tel Avivian building, the pride of the Jewish builders and craftsmen who toiled over in the 1920s. It had been designed to house the head office of the local Workers' Council. It remained such until toward the end of 1947, it became the headquarters of the Haganah, the main Zionist underground militia in Palestine. Located near the sea on Yarkon Street in the northern part of Tel Aviv, the building formed another fine addition to the first Hebrew city on the Mediterranean, the White City, as its literati and pundits affectionately called it. For in those days, unlike today, the immaculate whiteness of his houses still bathed the town as a whole in the opulent brightness so typical of Mediterranean port cities of that era and that region. It was a sight for sore eyes, elegantly fusing Bauhaus motifs with native Palestinian architecture in an admixture that was called Levantine, in the least derogatory sense of the term. Such too was the Red House, its simple rectangular features graced with frontal arches that framed the entrance and supported the balconies of its two upper stories. It was either its association with the workers' movement that had inspired the adjective red, or its pinkish tinge that it acquired during sunset that had given the house its name. The former was more fitting, as the building continued to be associated with the Zionist version of socialism when, in the 1970s, it became the main office for Israel's kibbutzim movement. Houses like this, important historical remnants of the mandatory period, prompted UNESCO in 2003 to designate Tel Aviv as a World Heritage Site. Today, the house is no longer there, a victim of development, which has razed this architectural relic to the ground to make room for a car park next to the new Sheraton Hotel. Thus, in this street, too, no traces left of the White City, which it has slowly transmogrified into the sprawling, polluted, extravagant metropolis that is the modern Tel Aviv. In this building, on a cold Wednesday afternoon, 10 March 1948, a group of 11 men, veteran Zionist leaders, together with young military Jewish officers, put the final touches on a plan for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That same evening, military orders were dispatched to the units on the ground to prepare for the systematic expulsion of Palestinians from vast areas of the country. The orders came from a detailed description of the methods to be employed to forcibly evict the people: large-scale intimidation, laying siege to and bombarding villages and population centers, setting fire to homes, properties, goods, expulsion, demolition, and finally planting mines among the rubble to prevent any of the expelled inhabitants from returning. Each unit was issued with its own list of villages and neighborhoods as the targets of the master plan. Codenamed Plan D, Dalet in Hebrew, this was the fourth and final version of less substantial plans that outlined the fate the Zionists had in store for Palestine and consequently for its native population. The previous three schemes had articulated only obscurely how the Zionist leadership contemplated dealing with the presence of so many Palestinians living in the land that the Jewish national movement coveted as its own. This fourth and last blueprint spelled it out clearly and unambiguously. Quote, "The Palestinians have to go," end quote. In the words of one of the first historians to note the significance of that plan, Simcha Flapan, the military campaign against the Arabs, including the conquest and destruction of the rural areas, was set forth in the Haganah's Plan Dalet. The aim for the plan was, in fact, the destruction of both the rural and urban areas of Palestine. As the first chapters of this book will attempt to show, this plan was both the inevitable product of the Zionist ideological impulse to have an exclusively Jewish presence in Palestine, and a response to developments on the ground once the British cabinet had decided to end the mandate. Clashes with local Palestinian militias provided the perfect context and pretext for implementing the ideological vision of an ethnically cleansed Palestine. The Zionist policy was first based on retaliation against Palestinian attacks in February of 1947, and it transformed into an initiative to ethnically cleanse the country as a whole in March of 1948. Once the decision was taken, it took 6 months to complete the mission. When it was over, more than half of Palestine's native population, close to 800,000 people, had been uprooted. 531 villages had been destroyed, and 11 urban neighborhoods had been emptied of their inhabitants. The plan decided upon on 10 March 1948, and above all, its systematic implementation in the following months, was a clear-cut case of ethnic cleansing operation regarded under international law today as a crime against humanity. After the Holocaust, it has become impossible to conceal large-scale crimes against humanity. Our modern communication-driven world, especially since the upsurge of electronic media, no longer allows human-made catastrophes to remain hidden from the public eye or to be denied. And yet one such crime has been erased almost totally from the global public memory: the disposition of the Palestinians in 1948 by Israel. This, the most formative element in the modern history of the land of Palestine, has ever since been systematically denied and is still today not recognized as an historical fact, let alone acknowledged as a crime that needs to be confronted politically as well as morally. Ethnic cleansing is a crime against humanity, and the people who perpetrate it today are considered criminals to be brought before special tribunals. It may be difficult to decide how one ought to refer to or deal with in the legal sphere those who initiated and perpetrated ethnic cleansing in Palestine in 1948. But it's impossible to reconstruct their crimes. Anyhow, it continues the ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Remarkable. And just a brief rant here, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. It is anything goes week between Christmas and New Year's here. Wesley Clark was on CNN's New Day show the day before Christmas, 2 days ago. And he was talking about our pullout from Syria, thus handing the Kurds over to Erdogan to slaughter. And again, you know, somebody was attacking me on Twitter over the week. Oh, yeah, Hartmann's a warmonger. No. I said on this program, we never should have gone into Syria in the first place, number one. And, you know, frankly, I don't think we should be in Iraq or Afghanistan right now. But once you're in, when you leave, you do it in a way that doesn't, at the very least, endanger your allies, particularly a minority group like the Kurds that have been, you know, struggling for their lives for centuries. Well, for a century now. So I'm not saying don't pull out. I'm saying if you're going to pull out, involve your allies. Threaten the Turks. Tell Erdogan, you've slaughtered these people. You do it at your own risk. But, you know, let's be reasonable about this. Anyhow, so Wesley Clark, he says, there doesn't seem to be any strategic rationale for the decision to pull out of Syria. And if there's no strategic rationale for the decision, then you have to ask, why was the decision made? People around the world are asking this, and some of our friends and allies in the Middle East are asking, did Erdogan blackmail the president? Was there a payoff or something? Why would a guy make a decision like this? Because all the recommendations were against it. And by the way, that's true. Literally, the Trump administration has yet to offer a single policy advisor who has come out and said, yeah, good idea. Even Rand Paul is not on board with this. Meanwhile, Joe Kennedy III is tweeting this. This is the Trump-Ryan McConnell trifecta. 4 million working-age Americans lost their health care, $1.5 trillion in corporate handout, $779 billion deficit, the worst December stock market since 1931, a 17% increase in hate crimes, 2,654 migrant children taken from their families, 40,000 gun deaths in 2017. The U.S. was added to the list of deadliest countries for the first time in history, as Trump is This is for journalists. Deadliest countries for journalists to cover for the first time in history. This is as Trump is attacking journalists. U.S. greenhouse gas emissions rise by 2.5%. 5 Trump aides have entered guilty pleas. 17 Trump-Russia investigations, 3 government shutdowns, and numerous allies abandoned. Gee, do you see a trend? Steve in Chicago. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind?
Yes, I wanted to make 2 points. One, I would agree with you with regard to a withdrawal from any of these countries where we're currently engaged in military action. There is a way to do things, and we know historically that when countries have abruptly withdrawn, leaving things like infrastructure that they've invested in, military hardware and equipment, it turns out that the people that you were once fighting are more than happy to take up that infrastructure, take up those arms that you left behind, and then go ahead and use it for decades against either your interests or other people.
And sometimes shoot you on the way out. This is why Jerry Ford did not announce in advance of the Vietnam withdrawal that he was withdrawing from Vietnam. He announced it as it was finished.
There's our Jeeps, our weapons for decades. They're still using them. So, this idea that you simply just, pick up and leave, it takes a lot to actually be able to withdraw tanks and large equipment and infrastructure and communications and so forth. Now, if it's true that we were fighting the enemy and that without us, that they're going to take over Afghanistan, you're going to hand them high-speed communications equipment and everything else so that they could expedite their agenda. Right. I mean, this is just stupid on its face. Secondly, I think you're right with regard to this notion about running as an outsider or versus an insider. By that logic, the last insider we had, which was George Bush Sr., the fact is that this is nothing but a marketing ploy. Poll after poll shows that people in America, when asked, will say that they hate Washington, they hate the legislative branch, they think that the judicial branch is politicized as compared to previous generations, and the executive's really the only one who stands a chance of getting a plurality of support in terms of a generic question. So you always want to run as an outsider because whenever you ask Americans what do they think about Washington, they hate Washington. So, everybody wants to be an outsider or declare themselves as such. No one's going to run on the notion that, I've been here 30 years. That's a great thing.
Well, I think that's Joe Biden's. No, Steve, hang on just a second. That is Joe Biden's calling card. That he knows how things work. He's been in the Senate. He's made things happen. We can debate the benefit of those things, but some of them are good. That's his calling card. So there really is I'm an insider versus I'm an outsider debate going on right now in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party, for that matter.
Right. I think you're right with regard to Biden, but that's the sort of one-off because that's only as counterposed to Trump.
Well, and this is my point about why I think Biden is toast, because that was Hillary Clinton's calling card, too. I'm the ultimate insider. I've been inside this game ever since I left college or, ever since my husband became governor of Arkansas. We know how government works. We know how the levers of power work. Therefore, you can trust us and turn it over to us. And now, given the crazy man that we have in the White House, a lot of us would love to have Hillary instead. But
right.
Anyway, you get my point.
Well,
but I still don't think insiderness is going to sell.
Well, I think it sells only in the context of running against someone like a Donald Trump because, we handed over the reins to an idiot. I mean, you don't say there's a problem with medicine in America. Okay, let's let the janitor down the hallway have the scalpel, which is what we did.
Yep.
No, you address the problem that, the doctors are imperfect and the system is imperfect. You don't hand the reins over to someone who has no experience doing this sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, the metaphor is a little imperfect. I'd say rather than handing the reins off to the janitor, because janitorial services are something that actually require a fair amount of skill and practice and experience.
Okay.
We handed it off to one of the patients who just happened to wander in confused off the street. Steve.
Yeah, in this case, if we were using a metaphor of psychology, we handed it over to one of the people who were one of the inmates in the insane asylum rather than someone else serving there in a support capacity.
Right, absolutely. Steve, thanks for the call. Rachel in Ukraine. Hey, Rachel, thanks for watching YouTube in Ukraine. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Joyous Kwanzaa to you.
Thank you.
Actually, this is something, I feel like I don't entirely have the whole story, but I'm sure people can figure it out pretty quickly. The story about, I think it was Monday, final Christmas shopping, and honestly, I don't even know where it is. Something very, very generically American. And some older white gentleman had himself a rather major meltdown by being served by shop assistants speaking to each other in Arabic.
Yes, I saw this on Twitter just about an hour ago.
Yeah. And again, it was one. I mean, a lot of people stood up for them and put him in his place.
Which is really nice. People are starting to talk back to the racists.
Yeah, my only thought is, like, I worry, and in this case, it really has looked like, pushing back on social media has had a positive effect. But I'm also wondering to what extent, I guess to what extent has folks like him, who's pretty much a walking joke, been emboldened in recent times, and the concern about, like, how much are we platforming them?
Yeah. I think that I get what you're saying, and certainly, I mean, the Nazis rose to power based on the press going, oh my God, look at that, they're beating up Jews. And then a whole bunch of other young white men who were anti-Semitic said, oh, they're beating up Jews, and they turned out in the streets, right? And it became its own generative thing, and it led arguably to the Holocaust. That said, I am concerned that the rise of the Proud Boys and these other right-wing groups, these other basically racist groups, are to a certain extent feeding off the publicity, but mostly they're feeding off Donald Trump constantly pounding on this stuff here in the United States domestically. And this trend that we've seen in the last 2 years in particular since the Trump presidency, and I think a lot of this is explicit pushback to the Trump presidency of, people before Trump, it was people of color being shot, right? Shot driving while black, shot walking while black, shot talking to police, whatever it may be. And now it's a little more benign. It's sitting in a hotel while black or that kind of thing. So you've got that where the bigots are being exposed. And then now there's this new subgenre of these videos, which is where the bigots are not just being exposed, but they're being talked back to. And I predict that is the next big thing, right? That people are going to be looking for opportunities to not only film bigots acting like asses, but to film themselves or their friends taking down those bigots verbally, pointing it out to them. So I get it's a two-edged sword, Rachel, but it's also that's the dynamic of our day. And if we don't push back, then Trump and the right-wing hate mongers win.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Don't you think?
I just wanted to say, like, how this is as opposed to the whole as part of a greater context.
Yeah. It's a really important point that you raise, Rachel, and it's an important conversation for us all to have. And frankly, I'm guessing that in some circles, the more responsible media circles, they're really struggling with this. At what point by reporting on what the hard right is doing do we empower them versus do we empower the opposition to them? And I think a lot of it has to do with how it's covered. Rachel, excellent question. Thank you for the call, and thanks again for watching us from all the way over there in Ukraine. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Christina in Santa Rosa, listening on KPFK. Hey, Christina, what's up?
I just wanted to thank you for the part about the head injuries. I suffer from a head injury, so that will help me. But I also wanted to just talk about the fact that we're all outsiders, especially when we don't stand up for the whistleblowers. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to do a shout-out for Reality Winner.
Yes.
I think, she was one of the first ones to tell us about the Russian interference in the election.
Yeah.
And she got 10 years in jail for doing so,
Was it 10? I thought it was 5. Are you sure? Or am I wrong?
I was told it was 10 when it happened, when it went down. I haven't followed her since then.
So maybe this, because actually I didn't see the story. Louise told me about it, and maybe it was she got 10 years, and so she's expected to serve 5. Because my question was, she's been in jail for a couple of years right now. I wonder if she's, if that's time served, but apparently not. Apparently she's still in jail.
Yeah. And it gets back to, was it Kathleen O'Reilly? I forget who it was who told us she was also a whistleblower working, I think, for the FBI. and I'm a little confused about Mueller today because I think they tried to put her away also for giving us information about the translations that were going on, and she was understanding about 9/11 before it happened via translations. She was correctly translating where people sitting next to her in the translation room were not correctly translating things. So it all depends on who's controlling the levels. So we're all outsiders from the insider picnic and how their corporations are running the world. So I liked what the guy said about, there's just so much to cover, like Citizens United, and how can we be insiders in our own government, and how can we get the Green New Deal that we need now, especially in California.
The way we need to do it, Christina, it's very straightforward. We need to engage in politics, and we need to wake up all our friends. Christina, very well said. Thanks for the call. Larry in Bogalusa, Louisiana. Am I saying it right, Larry? Bogalusa?
That's correct.
Hey, what's up?
Well, I just heard you earlier speaking about Senator Rand Paul's support of or his non-support of Trump's pullout of Syria, and we heard him on TV the other day saying that he did support the pullout.
Right. I saw that too, but I thought that he put a nuance on that, saying that he's uncertain about exactly how it's going to happen or what the reasons are, and he's got some concerns. But basically,
that's all I heard you saying that, and I didn't want people calling you a liar, Tom.
Yeah, well, thank you, Larry. I appreciate that. I don't want people calling me a liar either. I may be wrong on this because, like you, Larry, I just saw it on TV a few days ago. But my recollection was that Rand Paul was saying, yeah, these are my words, not his, but essentially, yeah, I'm a libertarian. Libertarians don't believe that the U.S. government should be engaged in foreign activity anywhere in the world. Everything should just be purely America first domestic policy. But that said, there's a right way and a wrong way to do things, and we don't know yet if this is the right way or the wrong way. I might be giving Rand Paul far more credit for nuance than he deserves. But that was, and in fact, maybe I was just even thinking that. Larry, thanks for calling and pointing that out. I appreciate it. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And apropos of anything goes week before New Year's, how do we get Kathy Griffiths back on CNN with Anderson Cooper? I like Anderson Cooper, but I love Kathy Griffiths. Nothing wrong with Andy, but come on, guys. It's like we figured out it was just a mask. It was phony Republican outrage. Just like the whole, how dare you say Merry Christmas, phony Republican outrage. Come on, get over it. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's up?
Yeah, I am concerned about Israel's reach into our government, mostly its state governments, where apparently in Texas, for instance, this Bahia Amawi was fired because she refused to sign, as part of her contract as a speech pathologist, she refused to sign a statement that she would not join boycott and divestment movement or boycott or divest of things herself that she
This is apropos of Israel.
Yeah. And I just think it's outrageous. And, until this story broke, I was totally ignorant about it because I think a lot of Republican legislatures throughout the country have done this, on the sly. I mean, there has not been a lot of discussion, here in this state particularly, and I was unaware that Minnesota has laws like this. There's about 26 states that support Israel and will do whatever they can, I guess, through state legislation to, prevent boycott and divestment. And I think it's really sad. Also,
I think it's a violation of the First Amendment, John.
Yep, and I have a connection with the Palestinian community, and I just think they have really suffered so much within this century and the last century. They're still suffering. Recently, I connect with people in Israel, and on one post, somebody said, "Well, how many how many Arabs did we kill today?" And they had like a thumbs up. It was like 4 or 5 people really thought that was a good thing. In one day that they killed 4 Arab people.
Yeah, I think
mostly, I'm sure they're children.
One of the things to keep in mind is that Israel and Israelis are not monolithic. That there is a strong progressive and democratic movement in Israel.
Right,
They're just not in power right now.
Right, and I read it on Haaretz. That's I was looking for more details.
Well, that's where the trolls are going to go, John.
The thing is they are interfering here in this country with people's rights to express themselves. I don't get that.
Yeah, I don't either, and it seems to me like just a blatant violation of the First Amendment, and I don't understand how any Republican would want to do that. But maybe I'm missing some nuance. John, thank you for the call. Robert in Chicago. Hey, Robert, what's up? Robert?
Yeah, Tom, hold on. Let me turn off my speakerphone. Hold on a second.
Yeah. Robert, I'm going to put you on hold. We'll get back to you in a little bit. David in San Francisco. Hey, David, thanks for listening to 910 AM. What's up?
Hey, Tom. I heard you talking about Syria and the Kurds, and I was just going to actually lay out. I just finished a book about Sam Giancana, the famous mobster from Chicago.
Yep.
It was a book that was written by his brother and his nephew, and it goes into really exacting detail from decades, from the 20s up through the 60s or 70s. And the issue of, say, for example, heroin smuggling through the Middle East, the players that we're hearing about in Syria are not necessarily who they seem to be. And,
are you talking about the Kurds?
Get into bigotry about who the Kurds are, but there are a number of Kurdish smugglers that have been involved in the heroin trade for 50 years, right?
Sure.
If not upwards. So, when you start looking at Trump as organized crime instead of Trump as a political animal, you've got to realize that his deals, his machinations probably have more to do with organized crime, but to leave the Kurds in the lurch, as he appears to do, that must mean that maybe new smuggling opportunities are in line.
No, I think it's the other way. I think you're, or maybe I'm misunderstanding you, David. I mean, in Iraq, I frankly, I have no idea what the heroin situation is in Syria, but not Iraq. In Afghanistan, the principal heroin growing region is in northern Afghanistan, and it's the so-called Northern Alliance. And these were not Kurds; these were Afghan Arabs who are, making their living on the opium trade. Anyway, it's not heroin typically, when it leaves the country. And I have not heard of the Kurds. The Kurdish region is lower. It is hotter. It's a lot of it is kind of desert-like, and that's where the oil is. So at least the Afghan and the well, not in Afghanistan. I don't know that there's oil in Afghanistan, but the Iraqi Kurds, control some of the most oil-rich regions of Iraq. I've never heard that the Kurds were involved in the heroin trade. It wouldn't surprise me if there are some Kurds who are involved in the heroin trade.
Well, they're mentioned in this Giancana book from 40 years ago and whatnot.
Right.
So in other words, to look at Trump as what he's doing is a gang war. It may be the Trump gang versus the Cheney gang, or the Trump gang versus the Oliver North gang, or the Eric Prince gang. or some other gangs.
Seems to me
around
like
the
they're all
world.
playing the same game, David. They're all playing international geopolitics to their own benefit and their own profit. Cheney with Halliburton,
right.
Eric Prince with Blackwater and Z or whatever it's called now, and Trump with, I mean, Trump's got a hotel in Turkey, and it's probably heavily leveraged. And if Trump is really broke, and I really think he is, I think the guy's more underwater than he is above water. I think he actually owes more money than he has. If he's really broke, one of his individual properties going down, like say the Trump shopping center in Turkey, might be enough to take down the whole company.
Oh, it could be, but in the big picture, these guys are dealing with money laundering. And say, for example, if we've been chasing after all of these banks for, now 10 years, all these international organized crime banks, the biggest Bank of America, Wells Fargo, much less Deutsche Bank and the others, they've got to be rapidly trying to switch their money laundering directions, and that's probably creating new gangs. So
yeah, I think a lot of that is moving to our Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross's bank it's in the Caymans, isn't it, or wherever it is. David, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
From UN headquarters.
You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Congressman Mark Pocan is with us. It's Wednesday, of course, and so time for Middays with Mark. Congressman Pocan taking your calls for the hour at 202-808-9925. And I should add, Congressman Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, kind of the head progressive guy, or one of the two, along with Pramila Jayapal in the House of Representatives, and represents the state of Wisconsin. The 2nd District of the state of Wisconsin, and his website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @MarkPocan, P-O-C-A. And Congressman, welcome back.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
It is great having you with us. So what is the status of the shutdown, and in your opinion, what's the status of our body politic and our body economic?
Yeah, so, I mean, the status of the shutdown is, I think, what everyone's hearing is what I'm hearing. I'm literally waiting to find out if I have to go back at any time before we get sworn on the 3rd. You would hope so, that we would end a shutdown. But Donald Trump seems to, he's even missing golfing, so this must be real serious to him, yet he's not actually negotiating. I mean, throughout the last several days, he talked about, having lunch, trying to figure out the wall, but he didn't have lunch with any Democrats. Or he's talked about doing leases for the wall, which is impossible, and either was a lie or he is completely uninformed. Either one makes me nervous that that's coming out of the president. So we're waiting for him to get over his, holding his breath that was induced by, some conservative, talking heads, and try to make sure we reopen the government. In the meantime, every time we do this, this is bad for the economy. It's bad for the markets. We saw what happened. It's bad across the board. And Donald Trump, I think right now cares more about trying to save face with a couple conservative talking heads than having the country move forward like we need to. So it's just kind of a sad state of affairs. I'm, again, waiting to see if we get called in at any time, but I'm not guessing he's going to change. I think he's going to hold his breath until we come in on the 3rd, and then he wants to try to blame it somehow on Democrats, but that's my best guess at this point.
Don't you think at a certain level this is the kickoff of his 2020 presidential reelection campaign, that he's basically down to a base of male misogynists and white people who hate people of color, and that's the subtext, obviously, of the wall. Keep those brown people out of this country. Yep. Even though I think it's for the last 10 years. I might be wrong on how many years. Maybe it's 9 years. The immigration from south of the border to the United States, excluding refugees, but actual migration, is negative. We've actually more people have left the United States in the last X number of years, 7, 8, 9, 10, than have come to the United States from south of the border.
And I saw Jeff Merkley put out a stat, I think also Chris Murphy put it out, that 94% of the money that we gave him in the last budget for border security, he hasn't spent yet. So This is even more ridiculous, right? We're not actually dealing with border security as he said he wants. This is about his ego and his base and a wall. And I think you're right. In fact, I think there's a good chance he may want to do a lot of short-term funding resolutions so that he can continually have this fight and blame Democrats. I wouldn't be shocked at all if that's the end result, is a short-term fix so that he can have this fight over and over and over.
Well, this is the 3rd time he shut down the government. Were the other 2 shutdowns, I'm sorry, they passed so fast I didn't notice.
One was like one day, they weren't significant. And even this one, it's...
But were they about the wall?
At least one other one, I believe, was, and they might have both have been. But again, most of this, you shouldn't shut down unless there's some kind of incompetence. And you had a Republican Congress, Republican Senate, Republican president, so obviously incompetence was probably the greater overall problem they're having. But Donald Trump is so unpredictable, and now even Republicans with the basically pushing out of Mattis, they're even concerned now because that's getting their attention. Rather than, of course, kids who are dying in our custody or anything else. So it's I'm just looking really forward to January 3rd when we can actually start our work. There's been no oversight for the last 2 years by anyone in Congress. We can start doing that. But I think that's what the president, ultimately, he was getting some really, really, really bad press with all of his associates getting indicted. He quickly pivoted to, the Syria situation and then this. He's basically taken off of the airwaves what he wanted to take off, but we're punishing a whole lot of people in the economy along the way.
Yeah. So let's pick up some phone calls here.
Absolutely.
Obi in La Crosse, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Congressman, studying my pocket constitution, my question's about pardon powers. How do we preempt the presidential pardon powers? It says he's in cases of impeachment. So does that mean that we have to pass articles of impeachment out of the House or merely form an impeachment committee? How far down the impeachment road does Congress have to go before his pardon powers are preempted?
Or limited?
Yeah, Obi, I couldn't tell you that directly. I mean, generally Congress doesn't have long and meaningful debates about impeachment, except when you have a situation like we have right now. And I think, part of everyone has been waiting for the Mueller investigation. We're going to be able to now do our proper oversight, including areas that Mr. Mueller is not looking at. But, there's a lot of various hypothetical situations that with this president, you never would have thought would have been hypothetical, but with this president could be. So, who he all could pardon, who all could be witnesses, the whole "you dirty rat" sort of, tweets that he's put out there to threaten. So I don't have a great answer for you, Ovi, other than, the big thing that we all are waiting for, because you're still going to have a Republican Senate in this, is the Mueller investigation, although I do think when you start seeing things like what happened in Syria, and specifically with, General Mattis leaving so quickly, quicker than he had said originally, this is what now troubles some Republicans. And maybe we can start getting their attention to some of the other things that have been troubling many of us for quite a bit of time.
Sheldon in Canada. Where in Canada are you, Sheldon?
Ontario.
Okay, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, thanks for taking my call, man. I just wanted to say something. If you guys could just hear me out. When Barack Obama was running for president in 2008, he said, well, he's going to give healthcare for all, and Canada was going to pay for it. If we are run on that, and then afterwards he come to the Congress and tell him the Congress now that he needs the Congress to give him the money to set it up to pay for it, wouldn't it be the Republican will be up in arms over it? Why is it that the Democrats are losing narrative on this thing when Mexico was supposed to pay for the wall? Nobody is stressing on that. And this is a winning argument. Let him get Mexico to answer for the question for Mexico. Where is Mexico in the whole negotiation of the wall?
So, Sheldon, a couple things. First of all, I think, unfortunately, we're getting pretty used to the president lying to us. So, don't forget, originally it was not only Mexico paying for the wall, but it was a concrete wall. Now it's this new design he sent out of iron slat, which was not a design that he created just in March of 2017 when he first had his designs for the wall come out. Everything keeps evolving with this president. So people are very aware of that. And the good news is we're not losing on this. It's a pretty narrow amount of people who want the wall and who want to shut down over the wall is even more narrow. So, we're all right having this conversation. We're all right trying to fight against any money being wasted on a wall. Look, a wall is a very old concept. We can have drones. We can have a lot of other ways of doing surveillance that can protect a border without having to put up a wall. And the president just doesn't want to talk about it because this is his kind of campaign rallying point. So the good news is we are winning on this. I think that point that you brought up, Sheldon, is out there. For his supporters, I don't think they really care. Whatever he says about this, they're going to believe. I loved Nancy Pelosi's comment about a beaded curtain we're going to be down to at some point, as the border under the president's trying to save face. But I think at the end of the day, the American people are with us on this.
Robert in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, this is Robert.
Hey, Robert, you're on the air. What's up?
Hey, Robert.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, with all this rhetoric going on from Trump over there about, Mexico's going to pay for the wall one way or another through tariffs or whatever. My question is on the tariffs. And I understand that, my understanding, or maybe I'm wrong here, is that the real person or people that are going to pay those tariffs are really the U.S. consumer, because we'll be paying higher prices for the goods and products and services coming from Mexico. But my real question is, who initially pays that fee? Is it the Mexican company trying to export to the United States, or is it the U.S. company trying to import into the United States?
Well, as I understand, a tariff essentially is money that goes into our government pool when the money does come in. So I guess, if he's arguing that when the consumer pays more here for something that gets a tariff coming in from Mexico, that somehow, I agree with you, I think the consumer ultimately winds up paying that in that scenario. But even this, though, is a faulty argument, if I can. Let me just take it one step back, Robert, because that agreement that he has with the Mexico government has not been approved by Congress yet. In fact, we have a lot of problems with it. A lot of the things that are marginally moving forward on labor standards have no enforcement mechanism whatsoever, so they sound great on paper, but they won't work. So we're still going to have problems that I don't know if he takes away the tariffs, you're still going to have job loss. So a lot of this is just Donald Trump bloviating, trying to save face. So ultimately, even getting to that point of the debate puts us in a place that is not a useful debate, because I would disagree that there will be tariffs that pay for this, because if we have a new NAFTA, hopefully the higher labor standards and other things will stop jobs from going there, but tariffs are not going to necessarily be in place to pay for it. So this is just Donald Trump once again diverting from the real issue, which is he can't get off of the wall because his base loves this, even though a wall is probably, one, definitely not necessary, two, not affordable, and three, there's better ways of actually having border protection.
Yeah, and I can add to that. Back in the mid-1980s, Jerry Schneiderman and I owned a company called Langley St. Clair Instrumentation Systems. We bought the back cover of Byte magazine for like a couple of years in a row, and we were importing stuff from Japan, specifically computer stuff, to sell in the United States. And there was a tariff at that time. There was an import tariff. And my recollection is that we ran it through a broker, and the broker collected the tariff and paid it, and that I was traveling to Japan a lot during this time, and that I was negotiating with a Japanese company over who's going to pick up how much of the tariff. So it was a negotiable item. I'm not sure who was legally responsible for it. Again, my recollection is it was handled by a broker. But to the specific, little picky-uni part of his question, the detail of the question, I think that's the answer, is that, the companies work it out, they figure it out, but ultimately, it gets either passed along to the consumer, or the company takes a lower profit or reduces their executive salaries, which is what we did.
You may not even have tariffs if you have a trade agreement.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. It's 18 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls here on Middays with Mark with Congressman Pocan right after this. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program, where despair is not an option. And welcome back. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
You're welcome. Hello, Tom. Hello, Congressman.
Hello.
Hello, Bob.
Yeah, we got a problem with disrepresentation and misrepresentation with our government today. To give you a real direct example, we talk about the green economy, but we never talk about ending cannabis prohibition, or even why it ever came about, other than the marijuana issue.
So you're talking about industrial hemp and all that, Bob. Congressman, your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, so I think part of the new Green Deal, anyway, if that's what we're referring to when we talk about the green economy, is more about trying to get off of fossil fuels and have renewables, and talking about the jobs that can be created by having solar and wind and other investment here in the United States. I don't think that, though, I don't disagree with Bob, though, that we don't talk enough about the terribly antiquated marijuana laws we have, the fact that many states now have legal recreational marijuana, many have medical marijuana, and yet those businesses can't put their money in a bank under federal law. That is crazy. And hopefully that's something that we can try to get done in the 116th Congress, in the next Congress. And there have been states, even Wisconsin, a state that under Scott Walker made it easier to grow hemp. So there have been some positive moves forward on this, but I think when people talk about new Green Deal, the green they're talking about is through energy and the environment, and trying to make sure that we can find a way to transition people from those fossil fuel jobs to jobs that can pay good family-supporting wages, but invest in solar, in wind, and all sorts of other alternative forms of energy.
Bo in Sherman Oaks, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. Hi, Tom. Thank you for coming out to California recently.
My pleasure.
I want to talk about brains because I think right now, and we all have a brain, even if we don't agree with one another. And in order to have language, you have to have a brain that works. So I loved you talking about brain injury earlier, Tom. But I know that new possibilities are possible for people who are intermittently working, for people who need to focus on something and could be exercising their brain and getting therapy. And I know that we could be having people different ages staying younger. There's a book by Lauren Marks called A Stitch at Time, who's a younger woman who had a stroke in Scotland and came back and is a working mom and runs a nonprofit. So I wondered what's happening with WOA and with jobs and with rehabilitation, and I'll leave it to that because that's sort of all over the map, but connected to people who need rehab, who might have been in car accidents and might have a closed brain injury.
Okay,
and
Congressman,
what can
we have 30 seconds.
Sure, that's a very, very broad area for 30 seconds. Let me maybe even go a bit more broad. One of the things that's been good is we've been able to, in a bipartisan way, continue funding for things like the National Institutes of Health and some other scientific funding where we do research, including around brain injuries. So with Democrats in charge, hopefully we can even negotiate more to help move that forward. But clearly this is something that we learn more and more about our brains on a regular basis, and the more we can invest in that is better for everyone in our society.
There you go. And exercise your brain. Listen to Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. It's great having politicians who are not only, honest and have integrity and care about the issues, but are smart. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. We'll be right back with more of your calls right after this. It's 22 minutes and change after the hour. You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. And Chip in Lawrence, Kansas, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you for taking my call, and happy holidays, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Same to you.
Congressman, I want your opinion on an idea I've had for a while. Over the years, I've worked several times in the Grand Teton National Park in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Great place, love it. And they have a hard time getting enough employees there from here in the States because people are like, oh, it doesn't pay enough, yada, yada. So we get a lot of people from other countries. Try and motivate people from our country, just in our younger people. What's your opinion on an idea for a tax break, like for maybe the first year or season or two for young people, get no federal taxes to go work in a national park, just to motivate them to get out, work, and actually see what we have of value for our own people. We don't even know what's in our own backyard.
Yeah, so Chip, a couple ideas. One, every time we have a shutdown, one of the areas that gets impacted are national parks. And, I remember the shutdown of 6 years ago or 5 years ago when I first got to Congress, people were vacationing and they weren't able to clean up the parks and do a lot of things you needed to. And at some point they were even shutting down some parts of the parks, and it had a negative effect. So, I think since we have so many shutdowns, that also isn't a good signal to anyone working there. Here's what I would argue. One of the first bills we're going to take up in the first 3 months of Congress is going to be to raise the minimum wage to $15, a bill that's been out there for quite a while. Bobby Scott, who's the chair of the Education and Labor Committee, it's going to go back to Education and Labor, myself and Stephanie Murphy from Florida are going to be the lead sponsors on the bill. I think that is one way. If we actually pay people more, and this is across all industries when people complain they can't find workers and it's not a highly skilled type of job where that's the barrier, it's because we're just simply not paying people enough. So if we can bump those salaries up to a point that people would actually come and do those jobs, and those are some really great jobs in our national parks, that might be the single best way to make it more attractive. So I'm hoping that when we get that bill through the House, we'll be able to negotiate with the Senate. It's obviously long overdue having a minimum wage increase, but that not only helps those lowest wage workers, but helps bump a lot of people that are just past that minimum wage level as well. So to me, that's the first and I think best thing we could do to help incentivize people to work in our national parks and to incentivize people in a lot of other areas.
Did you see where Trump is asking for more foreign workers for his winery? He's paying $9.40 an hour. Surprise.
And then he had undocumented workers as well at Mar-a-Lago. I mean,
yeah.
He's an interesting figure, isn't he?
Yeah, to say the least. Congressman Mark Pocan, it's Middays with Mark. We'll be right back with more of your calls for the congressman right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Congressman Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back. For our book club today, we're reading from a book that's long out of print, The History of World War II, Armed Services Memorial Edition. It's written by Francis Trevelyan Miller and the U.S. military, and with the Board of Historical and Military Authorities by Universal Book and Bible House in 1945. And this is from the chapter, The Phenomenon of Hitler. It starts out, his father was Alois Schicklgruber, the illegitimate child of a peasant girl who bore his mother's name until he was 40. Alois started out as a shoemaker's apprentice. Conscripted into the army, he rose to the rank of sergeant. That was so much above a mere cobbler, he stayed with the army for 15 years. After his discharge, he received a so-called certificate appointment that made him a minor customs official with the Imperial Civil Service. He had worked up to what seemed to him high above the scorned class of common people, the peasants, and the poor little working men. That trait had its influence on his son, Adolf. Alois Schicklgruber married 3 times. His first wife, 14 years older than he, divorced him. While his first marriage was still valid, another girl, Franziska Matzelsberger, bore him a son, Alois. Schicklgruber married her after his divorced wife died. 2 months after their marriage, she bore him a daughter, Angela. 1 year later, his second wife died. 10 months thereafter, he married Clara Polzel, who was his junior by 23 years. He was 47 then and had in the meantime changed his name to obtain a legacy to Hitler. From his third marriage sprang 5 children, of whom 3 died in infancy. The 2 surviving were Adolf and Paula. Adolf Hitler's half-brother, Alois, ran away from home, complaining about cruel treatment by his father. He worked as a waiter in England, married an Irish girl, treated her cruelly, and begot a son, William Patrick Hitler. After Adolf came to power, Alois returned to Germany, leaving wife and son behind, and became a prosperous innkeeper. Adolf's half-sister, Angela, also followed him to Germany from Austria to care for his households in Munich and Berchtesgaden. She was the mother of unhappy Gel Rubal, the girl who is said to have committed suicide after becoming enamored of her uncle Adolf. His sister Paula, considered a queer person, lived a troublesome life in Vienna and became an ardent Nazi. William Patrick Hitler broke away from the Hitler clan and came with his mother to the United States to fight against the world scourge of Nazism. This young man, imbued with the spirit of freedom inherited from his liberty-loving Irish mother, joined the United States Navy. The historians of this volume held confidential talks with Hitler's nephews, some of which can be related here. He placed before us official documents which threw light on the background of Adolf Hitler. He told us about the years when he lived with his uncle at Berchtesgaden, the conduct and habits of the Fuhrer, how in his mountain retreat, the most strongly fortified in the world, Hitler planned and plotted world conquest. The nephew related to us the secrets of the mysterious Rudolf Hess and the Ernst Putzi Hofstadtgegel, who fled to England, the latter being held prisoner in Canada and later coming to the United States. Letters were submitted to document the facts. These are books in themselves, which undoubtedly will be revealed in future years. It is sufficient to state here that young Patrick Hitler fled from Berchtesgaden when he became convinced that his uncle, Adolf, was suffering from delusions of grandeur and a messianic complex which endangered his own nephew's life as well as Germany and the whole world. Having disposed of 1,000 of his intimates, Adolf Hitler's own family was not safe from attack. He would break into his nephew's room in the midnight hours to rant about how he would conquer the world. As a child, he was as difficult as Alois, his father. Father Alois was a tyrannical egoist with a mania for cruelty. Young Adolf liked to rage in rabid oratories, audience or no audience. His father called him daffy and lazy. He wanted his son to become an important personage like himself. But 11-year-old Adolf revolted against going to school and exposing himself to the heavy task of book learning. He hated his teachers, he hated his schoolmates. Faced by the odious realities of life as they were fearfully represented to him by a father with a big stick and an inclination for alcohol, Adolf wanted only to escape. He was 13 at the time of his father's death and 19 when his mother died. Of the 6 years between those two events, little is known about the boy's doings, except that he prevailed upon his mother to take him out of the hated secondary school, and that she encouraged him in his hobby of making drawings until his ego became inflated to the point that he believed himself a genius. He lived on his mother's pension until her death. With his mother and her income gone, the escapist days were over. He had to face life. A misfit, uneducated, arrogant, undeveloped in mind, stubborn and quarrelsome, without any moral concepts. Such was young Adolf Hitler when he entered Vienna in the beginning of 1909. Here his ego was deflated for the first time. He could not even pass his entrance exams to the Academy of Arts. His drawings were considered crude imitations, counterfeits. When a jury at the Academy of Munich refused a painting he submitted for exhibition, he stormed back to inquire who composed the jury. He learned that among them was a Jew who ranked as one of the outstanding masters of German art. At once, he blamed the jury's decision to exclude his work upon this Jew, declaring, "They shall pay for this." Precipitated from vainglory, Hitler woke to find himself an obscure outcast. In his despair, he stooped so low in his own estimation as to take up work as an unskilled laborer. To carry mortar on scaffolding was far beneath his dignity. He had not yet conceived the idea that Providence had chose him to be the leader of the master race, the history of World War II.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back to the place where smart people get their news, the Thom Hartmann Program. It is, speaking of smart people, it is Middays with Mark, Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus representing Wisconsin's 2nd District in the U.S. House of Representatives. Pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan, taking your calls for the hour. And Will in Salem, Oregon, you're on the air. And thanks for watching us on Facebook Live. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Representative Pocan. Nice talking to you. Representative Pocan, I have a very short question. Would you be willing to sponsor legislation to repeal, reverse the 2005 bankruptcy bill that outlawed discharging private student loan debt for the first time? I mean, this is killing me personally and about everybody I know. It's really it's a horror. So that's my only question I have for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's something I'd take a look at. You know, I know that we've had a number of bills around student debt, including the very first bill in the country introduced back in 2013 to allow people to refinance debt. And this is one area I think now that we're back in the majority, you're going to see some positive action on. So let me take a look at it. I can't tell you directly. I wasn't, in Congress when it passed. I'd have to take a look at some of the other provisions within it and see what's there. But, financial aid or student debt is now the number 2 type of debt of all types of debt in the country, and it's really holding folks back. One of the reasons why we've introduced a debt-free college bill, which could have people go to a 4-year public institution and leave with 0 debt whatsoever. I think it's a really great initiative, and I think you're going to see and hear more about that in the 116th Congress. But there's a lot we need to do around student debt, including refinancing, including looking at existing debt, and I'll be glad to take a look at that bill.
Michael in Bronx, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Tom. Hello, Congressman Mark. I just had to echo and add to this whole thing of the border war with Trump's relentless attack on Christmas with this Happy Holidays versus Merry Christmas. He demands people to say Merry Christmas, but yet look what happened over the weekend with this shutdown. He ruined thousands of workers, Christmases and their families. If you saw the Daily News front cover, New York Daily News, that Saturday they said how the Trump stole Christmas, substituting Trump for Grinch, and they were right on target. And as a Christian, I am getting sick and doggone tired of people like Trump trying to claim Christianity, trying to force people to say Merry Christmas, and then yet he is never, ever sincere with that kind of greeting. There is no love. There is no care whatsoever on this guy. All he wants is people to just bow down, kiss his rump, violate every single law, constitutional right. You can go down the list. This guy is so doggone dangerous and reprehensible that I can't even think straight now, because my heart goes out to the thousands of workers that have been affected. And then meanwhile, he's still uttering lies against people of color, against Mexicans, against African Americans, saying we're bad to the core, we're rotten to the core, we're rapists and all that stuff. Yeah, pot calling the kettle black when he's the one that boasted on a live recording about grabbing women by the private parts. And then meanwhile, you have people coming into this nation from the other border that is not secure, that have been clearly armed and dangerous. Look at the gun massacres that's been going on. That's largely
Michael, let's let Congressman Pocan respond. Thank you for the great rant.
Yeah, Michael, I agree. This guy's a gem, right? That's about the only way to put it. He does so many things that are completely hypocritical, some things that he'll say and literally, hours later say the complete opposite thing, and he'll say he never said the other thing. His big sacrifice is not going to Mar-a-Lago and golfing. When I've read a bunch of accounts of people who are federal employees, 800,000 people are affected right now by the shutdown who didn't buy Christmas gifts because they're not sure when they're going to get paid. And, this is all over his holding his breath over the wall because he has to deliver for people, even though even the Republicans in Congress don't really believe in it. In the last appropriations bill, I know I said this before, Tom, in previous programs, I think it's good to emphasize, they put in the language in the appropriations bills that we passed that no money could go to any designs after March of 2017. That's the month that the designs came out for the president's wall. So even they know we can spend money far wiser on border security that doesn't involve a wall, and yet here we are, Paul Ryan unwilling to stand up to the president, Mitch McConnell unwilling to stand up, and now we're in a government shutdown. So there's a lot of bad behavior. I think Paul Ryan gets a lump of coal or two. I think Mitch McConnell gets a lump of coal or two. And Donald Trump, I think we can give him a coal plant because I think that's how he thinks.
An entire mine, all his own.
Yeah, it is.
Vince in Gulf Shores, Alabama. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Thanks. And Congressman, thank you for taking my call. And I appreciate you making yourself available like this. I had a question about the Posse Comitatus Act, and would it have been appropriate to invoke that during the deployment of troops to the border? And if the executive branch is responsible for enforcing laws, isn't that inherently contradictory with regard to this particular executive branch?
Boy, I'll tell you. So first of all, let me take on, I don't think the Posse Comitatus law would affect us putting troops at the border. So I don't think there'd be any way to invoke that in here. I do think what you're saying, though, about the president doing this is pretty amazing, right? His entire policy of bringing a bunch of people to the border when we knew that the last time there was a caravan, very few people actually wound up coming to the border in the end, and very few people got arrested. This was all, again, for show. This is Donald Trump being, first, a reality show star, second, a scheming business person, and third, the President of the United States. I think that's truly how he sees his pecking order of who he is, and it's good theater, it's good drama, it's good for ratings, sending troops down there, and it's good for his base. And now shutting down government, even though they told the Senate they were okay with the deal, all of a sudden he changed his mind because of some conservative commentators. And I think ultimately this is what Donald Trump wanted, again, is good ratings, but also to pull away from the real attention of what he's facing, and every one of his associates are getting indicted right now. Unfortunately, we have to live through this. This is the President of the United States. So my hopes are that come January 3rd, we start immediately doing the proper oversight hearings while moving forward, good policy, and we'll ultimately get to the bottom of all this. And, if it eventually means we have a President Pence, while that doesn't thrill me, it's better than a President Trump that scares so many people. So we're going to move forward on this, but I certainly agree this guy is a gem.
Yeah. My recollection is Posse Comitatus was passed to prevent the Northern soldiers from enforcing the law in the South, and that if the soldiers had been armed, and which Mattis didn't do, and if they had been turning those arms on U.S. residents,
right.
In other words, engaging in police activities, then it would have been a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. Is that correct?
That sounds about right, but again, I think they would have made sure that in no way were they doing something I think that's in violation. Should Congress, we're not initiating a war, so it's not like a Yemen situation. So I think, the president could do what he did. I also disagreed when they were asking for National Guard troops to go to the border, and Scott Walker sent some, which was also ridiculous. So a lot of people missed the holidays so that Donald Trump and people like Scott Walker could feel important, and we're waiting for this era to end.
Yeah, amen. Nick in Federal Way, Washington, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good afternoon, Congressman. Thanks for your service. I have a quick question. We all understand in Budget 101, Plan A is that Congress creates a budget and submits it to the president, and the president signs it. But I want you to check me on my civics. Hypothetically speaking, isn't it true that Congress could submit a budget, the president can veto it, and Congress can override that veto?
Well, yeah, we have the power of override, which is why on the continuing resolution that we had agreed to that the Senate sent over, had Paul Ryan just did his job and passed that and still passed what the president wanted, the president could have vetoed what we sent back to him, which everyone agreed to, and we could have overrode that veto if we actually had the guts to do it. Unfortunately, Paul Ryan and guts aren't technically allowed to be in the same sentence. So that's part of our problem. What we're hoping is, again, come January 3rd, Nancy Pelosi has no problem with having guts, and I think we'll be able to have a very different way to move forward, even though he's going to try to use it to blame and, as Tom said, set up his 2020 run. I think people, again, are way on to Donald Trump at this point, and we'll be able to move a lot better forward. But really, I don't think Paul Ryan ever would have done the right thing, like standing up and trying to override a veto. So while it's a real thing should have happened, I don't think it was a real situation because of Paul.
Okay. Sheila in Talent, Oregon. Sheila, we just have 50 seconds to a hard break here at 45, so if you could ask a real quick question for Congressman.
Yeah, I'd like to know what the Democrats are planning to end, how they're planning to end the detention centers so that there's not more deaths of children. And are you going to have to wait till the new Congress comes in, or are you making plans now? Are you doing things now to stop this?
Yeah, so the first thing we can do is oversight, and with the power of the purse on the Appropriations Committee, start scaling back the funding that they're giving on this, because that way they can't house people in the beds. That's a couple ways we can address it. To the second part of the question, because we don't have the majority and we're not meeting unless they bring us in until January 3rd, my guess is all that will happen after a January 3rd. But rest assured, I'm already watching a number of members on the relevant committees and chairs saying we're going to have oversight.
Wonderful. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website, pocan.house.gov. He represents Wisconsin's 2nd District. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the rest of us. And welcome back. Charles, watching Free Speech TV in Gold Hill, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Charles? Okay. Shira, Charles is on line 5 if you want to find out what's going on. Michael in Snohomish, Washington. Hey, Michael, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I was wondering if you know anything about Trump's ceding territory to Mexico. I heard over Christmas that another guest talking about Trump's border wall, and they said that Trump's plans cedes enough land to Mexico to more than equal the state of Delaware. And when I asked him how that happens, he said it was because the wall doesn't follow all the little whoopsie-doodles of the border and cuts across farmland and parkland to make it quicker and easier.
Right, it has
I
to
wondered
be,
if you knew anything about
it
that.
has to be inside the U.S., so it has to be set back from the border.
Yeah, I think if we ever got to this point that, again, I don't think we're ever going to get to, of having a full border. I assume that because of the actual line of the country and the geographic barriers and things, that they would have to have areas where you'll have U.S. land on the other side of the border. So arguably, I don't know what the size of that is, but that would be real. I think what's not real is there'll ever be a border across the entire southern border of the United States. So, again, as much as Donald Trump may say he wants it, it's not going to happen. I just don't see that ever happening.
Congressman, we already have a border wall that stretches, I think, about 1,000 miles. I mean, from California through much of Arizona, or New Mexico, rather. Mm-hmm. Are we to the point where, well, how do you expect this thing to play out? I mean, you're saying you don't expect it to happen, and yet Trump is staking his presidency on it. Do you think that's just all theater, or we did do some of this kind of construction back during the George H.W. Bush administration and the Clinton administration. I believe that's when most of the wall was built.
Yeah, I personally, this is just my opinion, I think this is such theater that even Donald Trump doesn't actually care about a wall. When he was offered money last year at this time from Chuck Schumer for a wall, and many of us were not happy about it because we think it's an absolutely idiotic idea to put a wall across the country, he didn't take yes for an answer. It's because, again, he loves to have go to the rallies and get the adoration from his fans about the issue, but if you actually build it, you take it away as an issue. So I'm not even sure how much he actually believes this. Clearly, the Republicans didn't, because they put the language in the last appropriations process that completely said you can't put a dime into anything that would even look like what Donald Trump said it would look like. So that's why I think it's not real. The reality is a wall is a very several century back solution. We have drones. We have other ways of being able to patrol borders without putting up a physical border, and he just doesn't want to accept that because he said it's going to be a wall, or now it's apparently the spiked metal slats, and I don't know, like Nancy said, he might be down to a beaded curtain very, very soon. But the reality is none of that actually makes sense, given there's technology that can do it much cheaper and better.
So you think this is like the Republican rhetoric on the balanced budget?
For Donald Trump, I truly think so, because when he had a chance, he did not take yes for an answer, and yet he loves to talk about it, but he didn't. When he had a chance, he didn't do it.
Right, and no Republican since Dwight Eisenhower has proposed a balanced budget. So it's amazing. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us, taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for the Congressman in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. Middays with Mark. We'll be right back with your calls for the Congressman. And welcome back, Congressman Pocan, taking your calls. Ken in Springfield, Illinois, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Ken?
Yes, thank you, Tom. Yes, Congressman. I'm kind of calling for something off the cuff. off the cuff. I'm sorry. I'm calling about smart meters. I see that Wisconsin has implemented a smart meter on the gas and electrical. My question is, do you think they're safe? Do you think that these organizations that are fighting the smart meters are legitimate? And do you think the gas and electric companies have an obligation of moving the meters away from the house? And what you think about the charges that the utility companies are charging, and if that's not a profit for them?
Okay, Ken, there's a lot there, and a lot of that happens at the state level. But I can tell you that in my last term in the state legislature, we did have a rather extensive hearing in a committee I was on smart meters, because we were helping to, I think, fund some of it happening around the state, and there were some areas that hadn't gone there yet. The lead opposition were people who wore the "Don't Tread on Me" flags that the Tea Party puts out there, and they were kind of the fringe of the Tea Party that was there. So I can't tell you that I'm extremely well versed on the issue, but from my experience, the people I've seen that have largely been opposing this have been kind of from the, and I know it sounds crazy to say the fringe of the Tea Party, but that's kind of where they came from. So I'm not too concerned, but I will admit this has not been in my federal wheelhouse.
Patty in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, hi, Congressman.
Hi, Patty.
I have a question. Why, this is environmental, and it concerns the Doppel line that's coming into Superior, Wisconsin, which is there. Do you know in which direction it's going?
No, I'm sorry. I don't know that.
This is the oil pipeline, right, Patty?
I would say that this is not just a state thing. This is a national thing, because if those pipelines break, which they can,
yeah,
we're going to have a disaster in the Great Lake that is between Minnesota and Wisconsin. Contamination of groundwater. If they're making their way across to go through underneath or near Lake Michigan, that's going to be another disaster. And I really think that as a congressman in the feds, in Washington D.C., I think you might want to inquire with Tammy Baldwin and other people and find out what the heck's going on up there.
Yeah, so Patty, there's lines I know that go through Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan. Where my ignorance comes in is this is not under my committee of jurisdiction. It's not my district because I have the southern part of the state. I just don't know that answer to that, but I can try to find out. I assume you're right. Tammy would have a better grip because she covers the whole state on this, so you might want to check with her office, but I just don't have an answer for you offhand.
Pedro in El Paso, Texas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Pedro.
Hello.
You are on the air, Pedro. Go ahead. Don't listen to your TV or radio.
I live down here. I live down here in the Southwest, and I just wanted to make a comment about that wall, making it safer. You know what? I live in one of the safest communities in the United States, which is down here in El Paso, Texas, and it's not because of that wall. You know, there's people that commute from Juarez, Mexico to El Paso, come and work, put in a day's work, and go back home to Juarez. That wall is not. That wall is. It doesn't inhibit those kind of people that want to come and work and make a difference in their lives. And another thing, he's talking about drugs. He needs to fix the problem here in the United States. That's why all those drugs are coming over, because the demand is here in the United States. We need to fix that problem first. And that's all I have to say on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro.
Yeah, Pedro, I wish I had at the tip of my tongue the stat, but it's something like 90 to 95% of the drug traffic that comes into the United States comes through points of entry, legal points of entry. So, again, a wall does not solve what the president claims he's trying to solve. So you're right. It's just another Trumpism, something that isn't true but is said over and over. Maybe that is what we should start calling things like that. The other part, you're right. I mean, if you put up a wall, I guarantee it will not be easy for people who have current working relationships to be able to go back and forth like they currently do, especially in areas like El Paso where it's quite common. So this is something that again, if it were ever to be real, would be part of the complications, which is why I think it'll never be real. But all the more reason, why would we even give him $5 billion to completely waste, and why we're fighting for this? Because there are better ways we can patrol the border without putting up a wall.
1 minute to go. Angel in Chicago. Quick question for the congressman.
Hi, yes. I was hoping to find out what he believes the percentages are that Trump will actually see jail time.
Good question. So I think there's a growing percent that he won't finish the term, even though I think, he's getting geared up to run for re-election. I think, there is a lot of questions about whether or not you can indict someone, right? You can't, because we have a possibility of impeachment. Will that happen? It depends. Will the Republicans start to see that this is a huge albatross around their neck? If they do in the Senate, then they might start acting. So there's a lot of things that have to happen, but I'm far lower on the jail time percent as I am on the perhaps leaving office by 2020. And if he runs, I do not think he'll get reelected. Places like Wisconsin, some of his biggest drop-off of any state he won was in Wisconsin. And Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania know he's screwing up on trade. He doesn't actually understand it, not delivering what he promised. So I think we're rid of him no matter what in a couple of years. I would prefer much sooner, but I think we'll be in a good place for sure in 2 years.
President Ulysses S. Grant was arrested by a police officer in Washington, D.C. for speeding and taken to jail. He paid $20 to bail himself out. Could that be a precedent?
Don't you wish? I don't know. The other option is, don't forget, New York State is going to be doing a separate a process that could have something come out. But more likely he'll just leave and put his tail behind his legs and take off.
Yeah, I think you're right. Congressman Pocan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, absolutely. Happy holidays to all your listeners.
Thank you. Back at you, and Happy New Year in advance. We'll see you next week.
You.
Thank you, sir. We'll be back with more of the program right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Check out Congressman Pocan's website, by the way, pocan.house.gov.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Here at the Thom Hartmann Program, we're creating basically 3 programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program. The Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from the Strip and Flip selection, as opposed to election, of 2016, 5 Jim Crows and Electronic Election Theft by Bob Fitrakis and Harvey Wasserman. This is from the chapter Part 1, page 15, Strip. The foundation of election theft is the manipulation of race as a divide and conquer strategy. It began with the first Jim Crow chattel slavery. Slavery in various forms has existed since the dawn of time, but in the colonies of British North America and then in the United States, it took on a uniquely virulent incarnation. Chattel slavery was, of course, a horrific, brutal labor system designed primarily in the American South to power a network of plantations that produced cotton, tobacco, indigo, rice, and other hot weather crops that could be grown in large fields. But it had a larger purpose here. Our peculiar institution, how the founders referred to slavery, was meant to divide black laborers from white in a caste system that would guarantee that they would never unite in rebellion. As we'll see, this originated with the infamous Bacon's Rebellion of 1675 in Virginia, in which indentured servants of both races joined forces. Plantation owners vowed to make sure that that never happened again. When the United States became an independent country, plantation owners also vowed to secure political benefits from their slaves. Thus, they wrote into the Constitution the 3/5 clause that gave slave owners additional representation for their slaves, even though those slaves could not vote. That additional vote count guaranteed that every president from Jefferson to Lincoln either owned slaves or his vice president did, and that the Congress was strongly controlled by slave owners right up to the outbreak of the Civil War. After the Civil War, with formal slavery abolished, a Jim Crow system of racial segregation overtook the South. Enforced by the Democratic Party and its Ku Klux Klan terror wing, white landowners updated the realities of slavery to again keep blacks and whites apart. The roots of racism since 1865 has been the treatment of legally freed African Americans as something less than human, guaranteeing all whites a sense of superiority and an economic leg up. When the populist and socialist movements that campaigned most powerfully from the 1880s to the 1920s worked to overcome this separation, they were hammered by the court and electoral systems through a series of stolen elections and twisted race-based legal decisions, and the fusion of the Democratic and Republican parties in the 1917 municipal races in the Northeast. Confirmed by the Supreme Court in the 1890s, this updated Jim Crow caste system again guaranteed that blacks in the South and parts of the North would not be allowed to vote, and that they would be carefully divided from whites by caste as well as class. Since 1970, the primary weapon for suppressing the minority vote has been the third Jim Crow, the drug war. In the tradition of Bacon's Rebellion and the populist socialist upheavals, blacks and whites once again began to unite during the civil rights and anti-war movements of the 1950s and 60s. In response, Richard Nixon's Republican Party invoked the divide and conquer war on drugs. Confronted with the liberalization of the Southern Democratic Party, Nixon feared that black votes might remake America's political map. In Republican eyes, there was only one solution: disenfranchise the African American population, along with young and Latino voters who were leaning strongly to the left. In 1972, Nixon pointedly ignored a powerful report from his own Blue Ribbon Schaefer Commission on drug use and escalated the attack on marijuana and other drugs. In the 45 years since, a staggering 41 million Americans have been arrested for pot or other controlled substances. That's a number of human beings that exceeds the populations of more than 150 other countries worldwide. It has left the United States with the largest prison population in the history of the modern world, while having little or no impact on the actual use of drugs. As Michelle Alexander has shown in her landmark book, The New Jim Crow, the majority of those incarcerated have been black and Latino, with a devastating impact on our elections. Millions of these mostly young, mostly male citizens have been stripped of their right to vote, as well as their ability to maintain families, obtain work, and meaningfully participate in the political lives of their communities. All this has been by design. Once again, a new Jim Crow policy has been delegated by a ruling elite to strip our non-white population of its ability to exercise its fair share of power in our electoral process and to unite with whites in political action. In the 1890s, rising industrial interests committed the nation to a fourth Jim Crow, a course of race-based global empire. The U.S. already had a history of foreign intervention, dating to Thomas Jefferson's 1803 use of our fledgling Navy to fight pirates along the coast, the shores of Tripoli, of what's now called Libya. That was followed by the conquest of the North American continent with genocidal warfare used against the indigenous peoples who had lived here for 20,000 years. By the 1890s, when the frontier consumed, America's giant corporations began to expand overseas. They started with Hawaii, a constitutional monarchy, and then pushed into Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and beyond. And in all cases, these interventions involved the white-ruled U.S. interfering with the political systems of non-white countries. In discussing this fourth Jim Crow, we include an extensive, though not complete, list of these interventions. It underscores the reality that our own political system has become an imperial juggernaut with the inevitable blowback bound to obliterate any residual pretense to real democracy at home. Generally, there's been an attempt to portray these interventions as benign, meant to bring democracy, progress, and the Christian faith to third world nations. In fact, they've been largely economic in purpose, a dollar democracy to grab other people's resources. The Strip and Flip selection of 2016 by Bob Petrakis and Harvey Wall.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So we had our children over last night. Well, one of them is out of town, but two of our three kids and grandkids, and it was like, okay, let's watch a Christmas movie. Then we played a great board game and had a nice dinner together, and then it was like, let's watch a Christmas movie. And one member of our family suggested Die Hard, and so Matthew Black tweets, the thing is, Die Hard wasn't a Christmas movie originally. The script was changed by Constantine in 336 to align it with the Sol Invictus Festival. It was declared a Christmas movie at the Council of Nicaea. It says the Messianic secret, but I can't believe I have to get angry about this. Okay, so is Die Hard a Christmas? I don't. But back to some of the news of the day. And by the way, we're doing this today, tomorrow, and Friday, kind of anything goes Christmas to New Year's week. If there's anything in particular you'd like to talk about, feel free to give us a shout. But I just wanted to go through some of the news of the day and some of the kind of strange things that are going on as well. Our local Portland news, which I think this is micro to the macro, right? This is in a little Portland way what is happening on an entire national scale. The first over the weekend here, Jermaine Massey, excuse me. He lives up in Washington State. He's not a Portlander, and so he needed a hotel here in Portland. So he booked a room in the DoubleTree Hotel down in the Lloyd District, and because he wanted to go to the Moda Center and watch the Travis Scott performance, which he did. And when Jermaine came back to the DoubleTree, he noticed on his cell phone that his mother had called, and he's from Kent, Washington, but she lives way the heck out on the East Coast. And he was like, whoa, it's late. It's on the East Coast. There must be a problem here, maybe an emergency. So he sat right down in the lobby and called his mom back. And guess what? The hotel came over and said, oh, a black man sitting in the lobby all by himself. He must be, well, they didn't say that, but they said, are you here in the hotel? And he held out his card, right, his room card. And they were like, well, that doesn't prove anything. And he's like, I'm on the phone to my mom. Leave me alone. And so they called the police. And the police dragged him out. Well, they let him go up to his room and recover his belongings, and then go to the front desk and check himself out. This is bizarre, right? Sitting, talking on the phone to your mother while black. The list just gets longer and longer. Meanwhile, another Portland story that also is meta to the whole nation. Back in 2016, Fallon Smart, 15 years old, was crossing the street in Portland and was hit by apparently a drunk driver. It was a hit and run. The driver was identified as Abdulrahman Samir Noura, a Saudi national, 21 years old, young man from Saudi Arabia. And before Mr. Noura could be arraigned or taken to, maybe he was arraigned, but before he could be dragged into court, he vanished. Just vanished. He's facing first-degree manslaughter. That's 10 years in prison, minimum, plus hit and run, plus reckless endangerment, plus reckless driving. 2 weeks before his trial, June 10th, 2017, he had a tracking device. He had an ankle bracelet. He removed it and literally disappeared off the face of the United States. And now the Saudis have confirmed that, yep, they provided him with a passport, which had been taken away, and apparently provided him with a private jet to fly home. Just like Saudi Arabia doesn't much give a rat's ass what we think about all the children that they have slaughtered and are currently in the process of starving to death in Yemen. Just like Saudi Arabia doesn't give a rat's ass about our opinion of their murdering, torturing, dismembering a U.S. resident and Washington Post journalist. The Saudis don't much care about our laws, apparently, either. And neither do the Turks, by the way. Erdogan's guys, you'll recall, beat up a bunch of local American protesters. And this is during the Bush administration, or no, it was during Obama's administration, whatever it was. And we just said, oh, well, c'est la vie. And now Erdogan is like, no, let me slaughter the Kurds, please. I tweeted over the weekend, or over the holiday, that, there's this sealed indictment against a bank, against a foreign corporation, that the foreign corporation actually is fighting in the U.S. courts, and it went to the Supreme Court. And so under seal, in secret, the Supreme Court is looking at this case where this foreign organization is saying Robert Mueller does not have the authority to demand what he's demanding of us. And we don't know what that is, but so I tweeted, I think it's Deutsche Bank. Now, other people tweeted back saying, no, I don't think it's Deutsche Bank, because Deutsche Bank is actually majority owned by a bunch of big American companies and hedge funds and billionaires and whatnot. It's not even a German-owned bank anymore. So maybe not. I mean, the other one might be VBE Bank, which is the Russian bank, which is government-owned, or I think majority government-owned, and that had signed the paperwork, or if it hadn't reached that point, had indicated the willingness to sign the paperwork to finance the Trump Tower in Moscow. That actually, in retrospect, is making more sense. But in response to my initial tweet that I thought it was Deutsche Bank, because they're the only bank that has been willing to loan money to Donald Trump since the 90s, since his bankruptcies. He's gotten money from two sources, from money laundering via offshore oligarchs, many of them Russian, but also from a whole bunch of other countries. Money laundering. The Saudis and the Emiratis and, very, very wealthy middle-aged sheikhs, and Deutsche Bank. That's it. That's where all the money that has kept this little, 15, 20-person business called the Trump Organization in going. We all think of him as some giant mogul. Well, he's not. He's running a licensing operation. He's got, fewer than a couple dozen employees, and is probably net in debt. He's probably not even a billionaire. He's probably my net worth exceeds his. Probably your net worth exceeds Donald Trump's. Although, we don't know because we haven't seen his tax returns. But what we do know, as he is railing about Chairman Powell of the Fed raising interest rates back up to a reasonable level, keep in mind, as we hit each recession all the way back to the 1940s, the average interest rate in the United States, the average federal funds rate, the benchmark interest rate, had been in the neighborhood of 5%. The last couple, it was around 6%. And we go into a recession, and to get us out of the recession, the bank then can lower the interest rate so that people borrow money and companies borrow money. They spend that money into the economy. Spending money into an economy stimulates the economy, which gets you out of the recession. But in order to be able to successfully get you out of the recession, you have to have interest rates that are high enough that you can lower them. Now, I realize there are some people who are saying this is not the best way to get out of a recession. We should instead do what Australia does. Australia has been largely unaffected by recessions for 30 years. And the reason why is that the Australian government has this massive multi-hundred billion, maybe $1 trillion, basically rainy day fund. And this giant surplus. And whenever the economy goes into recession, they actually write checks to people. Seriously, you're an Australian citizen, you get a check. Or they write them to employers. I mean, this is what Germany did in 2009. They called it the Kurzarbeit program, short work program. And the government said to the factories, Put people on 3/4 of a week or a half a week instead of working 40 hours a week, have them work 30 hours or 20 hours, but we're going to pay them for the full week. You pay them for the hours that they actually work, and we'll make up the difference. And that's how Germany prevented the recession from being severe for them. They had, probably the best response to it. But Australia did something very similar. And we could do that. But that's kind of a peripheral tangent here. The point is, this is how we do it. The Fed's got to get the interest rates back up to 5 or 6% in order to, to be ready to deal with the next recession, because that's how we do it, right? We do it through our banking system, unlike Australia and Germany. So Trump is squealing like a stuck pig about interest rates going up. Now, why would that be? Now, he says it's because it's hurting the stock market. It might have some small effect on the stock market, but mostly it's hurting people who borrow money, like Donald Trump. He owes Deutsche Bank $50 million for the Trump Hotel and Tower in Chicago, according to the Financial Times today. He owes Deutsche Bank over $50 million and the interest rate. By the way, these are all variable interest rate loans. So when the prime rate goes up, his payments go up. It was prime minus 0.5% on the Trump Tower in Chicago, the old post office in Washington, D.C. This is the Trump Hotel, Trump International in D.C. He owes them over $50 million, and it's prime plus 2%. So he's paying, like closing in on 5% right now. The Trump National Doral in Miami, he owes Deutsche Bank over $50 million, and then he has a separate loan with them for $5 to $25 million, and that's prime plus minus 0.75%. So strange goings on. This is actually from a story from August 30th, 2017, titled "Donald Trump's Debt to Deutsche Bank," if you want to check it out. But people have been wondering, why is Trump so hysterical about interest rates? Maybe it's going to put his business empire at risk. In the first hour of the program, I was talking at some length about the scams that are being run by the Trump administration. The New York Times reporting that, for example, at the end of the Obama administration, Walmart owed $1 billion on a foreign bribery investigation. Of course, nobody was going to go to jail. We don't do that anymore, but, bribery is a crime. Barclays was going to have to pay $7 billion to settle civil claims. In other words, they ripped people off. They were going to have to reimburse that. Royal Bank of Scotland was ensnared in a criminal investigation. Obama leaves. Trump comes in. It's all good. Don't worry, guys. The New York Times writing about this, how the Trump administration, 62% drop in penalties and illicit profits ordered returned. 72% decline in corporate penalties, a lighter touch of the banking industry. Obama brought 71 actions against the banks in the first 2 years. Trump, 17. Yeah.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And what the fall of the Roman Republic can teach us about America. There's a lot in the news. I'll share that with you. Plus, we'll pick up your phone calls. This kind of anything goes week. And welcome back. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington, watching us on presumably Free Speech TV via Roku.
Yes, sir. And
Hey,
may
Chaz.
I wish you and your family and staff, celebrando los muertos, a very happy Diwali, Hanukkah Samich, Yo Saturnalia, Glad Yule, Happy Festivus, Merry Christmas, Happy Boxing Day, and a Happy New Year.
And today's the first day of Kwanzaa, Chaz.
Folks don't celebrate Kwanzaa as much as they used to. There's an interesting background about that, but I agree with you. It should be.
I think it might just be that it's not getting as much publicity because it's an explicitly non-commercial holiday, so nobody's making money advertising on Kwanzaa.
And some folks are not real proud to claim Kwanzaa because if you look at the history of the founder, it's a little bit shady. But obviously, that's not why I called. I wanted to talk to you about immigrant paradox. I know that it's something that would change the conversation a great deal if people knew the background of it. I'm surprised you don't talk about immigrant paradox more often. Are you familiar with it at all?
Yeah, you can get to that in just a second. I would say the background of Christianity is pretty shady too. But anyhow, okay, immigrant paradox.
I would certainly agree with you. Our ability to co-opt, what's the term that folks are accused of co-opting other people's
cultural
customs
appropriation.
cultural appropriation. Yeah, we're pretty
Christmas
good on that.
is the biggest example of that. Yeah. Anyhow,
yeah,
you
I
were
don't
saying.
think that's a bad thing. I lived in a Navy town, and we kind of pick and choose from certain clothing, food, customs, family values. I think it's all good. We're all contributing to that melting pot. But immigrant paradox is the concept where folks that come in, they're not committing crimes. The natives are committing more crimes. But the immigrants that are coming in typically are healthier, they're more productive, and they do not commit as many crimes as, say, the nationals. And I think that we need to show that without immigration, our population would actually be declining. And I did a rant some time ago and said that, some very important folks were contributing to the lifeblood of the United States.
Yeah. And by the way, because Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Mexico all have national health care programs, the rate of vaccination among children who are coming in as refugees right now is higher than the rate of vaccination in the United States.
See, that's something we never talk about is I can't get a lot of background on Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. I know that like 10,000 people started on that march. Only 10% of it made it to the border. A lot of them settled in Mexico.
Yeah, along the way. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. The other part of the immigrant thing is that there is this. Maybe immigrant paradox is the word. I don't recall. There's actually an anthropological or sociological descriptor for the fact that immigrants tend to start more businesses. They tend to be the original small business entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I've said that 51% of billion-dollar startups are created by immigrants in America. A third of Nobel Prizes come to American immigrants.
Wow. See, these are.
Check out my rant, Tom. Check out my rant.
Oh, you mean that you uploaded to our website? I've got to get Louise to do that. I don't know how to do that. Louise has it, and we've got to get to them. Chaz, I'll do it. Thank you very much. Not to blame it on Louise. Who's a Republican politician who blames something on his wife? I'm sorry, Louise. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. 22 and a half minutes past the hour. Stick around. And welcome back. 23 minutes past the hour. Anything goes week here. Charles in Gold Hill, Oregon. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I would like to talk about some of the logistics involving the wall.
Okay.
We have talked about the design, but to further the design, they need to establish the route. Now, the setbacks and the electronic surveillance will also have to be considered in that, and they're going to seize this property from private landowners, and they are going to keep animals, farmers, cattle ranchers, and everybody from accessing the water at the Rio Grande. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on this.
Wow, that last part I had not even considered. You've got a lot of cattle ranchers and farmers, presumably, who have ranches and farms that border or that abut the Rio Grande, and the closer they are to Texas. I mean, the Rio Grande is actually a river in Texas. It kind of peters out by the time it gets to California. Because of all the water usage, but I'll bet that their animals are, and they may even be using it for irrigation, are using that, and they will be cut off by the wall. If we had a caller earlier from somebody who lived in a town near the border, if anybody knows the details of that, I don't know, Charles, off the top of my head, but if anybody knows what impact that's going to have, give us a shout. I'd love to hear about it. And it makes perfect sense, Charles. Your point makes perfect sense. And there's no discussion about this because, nobody's taking it seriously, what Donald Trump is trying to do.
But it might be a good argument against him, and to point out that it could take 10 years in the litigation for taking property via eminent domain could be a quagmire.
Yeah, absolutely. The Kelo decision notwithstanding. Absolutely. And interesting. Charles, thanks for the call. And I would add, Charles, I'll bet in terms of low-hanging fruit, in terms of places where a lot of people come across the border and where it's relatively easy to build a wall, and the near population centers and all that kind of stuff. I'm guessing all those already have a wall. Wayne in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Hey, Wayne, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I have another wall question. We know that the religious right has a support of Trump, or they're supporting him. I have a biblical question for you that deals with the immigration at the southern border. For example, like we hear about these Honduras families fleeing because of almost certain death from criminals and things like that. In the Bible, like I think it's in the book of Matthew, if we had like a Pharaoh Trump during biblical times, when Mary, Joseph, and baby infant Jesus were fleeing, King Herod wanted to kill them.
Right, and they went to Egypt.
And if Pharaoh Trump put up a big wall between Egypt and Judea and prevented them to get crossing it, would we have had a whole different story in the New Testament?
Yeah.
I mean, he's an expert at 2 Corinthians. Do you think he's ever read?
Both of them.
Matthew.
No, I don't think he's ever read Matthew. I don't even think he's ever read 2 Corinthians. What's interesting
That's
is
an analogy to what we're happening in the southern border.
No, you're absolutely right.
The story was immigration.
And in fact, the Washington Post had an interesting story yesterday. Trump and Pence both went to the National Cathedral, which is a very progressive church, for Christmas this year. And in both cases, they heard a sermon about how Mary, Jesus, and Joseph had to flee and go to Egypt, and they were able to make it back because there wasn't a wall implicit in the story. So Trump actually heard that, although apparently he was in jolly good spirits and very nice to everybody, but he actually heard that story and said to Pence, who knows? Wayne, thanks for the call. Yeah, the inconvenient truths. We'll be back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
What the fall of the Roman Republic can teach us about America right after this. Our book today is Warrior Is by Harley Zephyr and Robin Zephyr. It's an absolutely brilliant book about Native Americans and Native American history. This is from page 428 in the chapter Approach. Sitting Bull was one of the most recognizable and yet disliked Lakota leaders according to the U.S. military and the white society as a whole. This was the case thanks to the heavily promoted misinformation about and fear of and general prejudice against the Lakota and Indian people in general. The non-treating signing Lakota, of whom Sitting Bull was one, had been unfairly portrayed as hostiles. Also, the whites feared Sitting Bull because he was the manifestation of the hostiles as stereotyped in the U.S. media, especially in the media of the Midwestern section of the Great Plains at the time, such as the Bismarck Tribune. The dislike of Sitting Bull and his Lakota followers, and of all bands of Lakota, was perpetuated by the U.S. military's portrayal of the Hunkpapa Lakota leader as well. Sitting Bull, ever since the early 1850s, the beginning of the encroachment, of the whites onto the Lakota's Aboriginal homelands, was a vocal and easily recognized proponent of preserving the Lakota's traditional way of life, the free, sovereign, nomadic lifestyle that the Lakota were meant to live. The Hunkpapa leader was a gifted leader with a spiritual aura about him that allowed him to communicate with all beings through the natural energy of the spirit world. Sitting Bull was very outspoken and was often quoted when speaking about how he viewed the natural world and the clash of cultures. Here are some of his famous quotations. What white man can ever say I stole his land or a penny of his money, yet they say I'm a thief? If we must die, we die defending our rights. What treaty that the whites have kept has the red man broken? Not one. Strangely enough, they have a mind to till the soil, and the love of possessions is a disease in them. The earth has received the embrace of the sun, and we shall see the results of that love. Each man is good in his sight. It is not necessary for eagles to be crows. Let us put our minds together and see what life we can make for our children. It is through this mysterious power that we too have our being, and we therefore yield to our neighbors, even to our animal neighbors, the same rights as we ourselves have to inhabit this vast land." End of quotes. Because of his prominent position among his own people and among the Lakota in general, Sitting Bull was a force. When he chose to align with the young Ninkoju warrior by the name of Spirit Horse, the two men made a formidable pair. Sitting Bull with his spiritual and charismatic leadership abilities, and Spirit Horse with his finely honed experience in military tactics, protocol planning, and strategy, a great source of battle knowledge and unlimited courage and fearlessness. Sitting Bull, however, would continue his efforts to seek peace and diplomacy with the United States and its military leaders, especially Custer, Grant, Sheridan, Terry, and Crook. The U.S. military, and especially the Dakota Territory military leadership, all at once feared and admired and disdained the two Lakota leaders. The United States feared them for their notorious nature, their popularity among the Lakota people, and their innate ability to continue to frustrate the general policies of the U.S. government. The United States and its officials were trying to tame and soothe the Indians so to lure them into signing away all their land holdings and rights by agreeing to the so-called treaties. Many other Lakota headmen agreed to sign these treaties. Many Lakota believed that to be something that would lead to the future detriment of the Lakota. Terry, Sheridan, Grant, Sherman, and Custer all had personal feelings about the Lakota and about men like Sitting Bull. In the 1860s, through the time period of the lead up to the Powder River Campaign of 1876, the U.S. military became committed to removing, eliminating, annihilating, and destroying all of the Lakota, but especially Sitting Bull. Sheridan would be heard saying to Terry, "The only good Indian I ever saw were dead," or stating that the U.S. will break him, Sitting Bull, and his people, using the metaphor of a controlling owner breaking his horse, taming it so it could be ridden, or indicating how the controlling master breaks a slave, not to rebel or resist, leading the slave to merely submit and give in to the master's will. A big part of the reason why the U.S. military's hatred toward Sitting Bull and the Lakota intensified was the issue of the gold in the Hisapa. The desire to obtain that gold rose to prominence in the minds of the greedy government officials and private business ventures. The financial and mining interests were foaming at the mouth, wanting to get their hands on the Black Hills. No matter the desires, feelings, rights, or very lives of the Lakota, the United States was determined to possess the Black Hills at any cost, whether in effort, in money, or lost lives, or in lost honor and humanity. It became an obsession for many in private business and in the U.S. government and military. And that obsession spread like a dark poisonous snake had bitten them all, and had spread the vile poison of greed, vanity, covetousness, death, and destruction. Having become overbearing, it soaked into the souls, minds, spirits, and what was left of the hearts of the men calling the shots. Ironically, even Custer acknowledged how the Indians likely felt about the encroachment of the whites, saying, quote, "If I were an Indian, I would greatly prefer to cast my lot among those of my people who adhere to the free open plains, rather than submit to the confined limits of a reservation." This warrior is.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Boy, Seth Abramson on a tear over on Twitter. There is simply no question left, none whatsoever, that the Trump campaign was secretly negotiating future U.S. foreign policy throughout the 26 campaign in order to win covert and illegal financial and other support from Russia, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Hungary, Israel, and Egypt. And then he just lays it out. He goes through all the details, and it even ties into what Trump just did, how he just sold out the Kurds. It's a pretty amazing piece. I just retweeted it, and thanks to Judy who gave me a heads up on it. I'll like her tweet. Pretty amazing stuff. Meanwhile, Ryan Throne is tweeting, Air Force One spotted over Europe. Trump hasn't tweeted in 17 hours. That and Sean said that she just got a bing on her phone that the BBC is reporting that Trump has landed in Iraq or is about to land in Iraq. So I guess he got shamed by all the people saying, oh, the first president ever to not visit troops during time of war, right? Or at least since 2002, which is when we started these wars. I call them occupations, so they prefer to call them wars. So, and finally, this Jonathan Vankin over at Inquisitor.com. Donald Trump, according to a CNN investigative report published on Sunday, made his announcement that he would order a full withdrawal of the United States military forces from Syria after a phone call from Erdogan. And so why did Trump accede to Erdogan's demands? The main reasons are unclear, but 4 months before Trump made his sudden decision, a major political party in Syria called for Erdogan's government to seize the twin Trump Towers Istanbul skyscrapers, according to a report by the Turkish newspaper Hurriyet Daily News. The call to seize the Trump Towers Istanbul came from Turkey's IYI party, or Good Party in English, which implored Erdogan to seize the buildings as retaliation for U.S. sanctions against two top officials in Erdogan's regime who are accused of human rights violations, according to an account in Britain's Express newspaper. So Trump pulls in as much as $5 million simply by licensing his name to the Dogan Group for the Trump Towers Istanbul complex. Amazing. So it's about $5 million a year, apparently. Incredible. There are no depths to which this guy will not sink. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Dr. Tom. You were asking about the logistics of the wall.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things most people have never heard of is the fact that there is a Native American reservation that spans both sides of the border. They have had what is called a temporary barrier that stops vehicles, but it does not prevent the passage of people walking through, nor of animals like if they're cattle, deer, and other species. One of the big problems is that the environmentalists are concerned about building a wall that will prevent species from going back and forth and will limit the gene pool of all types of animals.
Right, especially the migratory species like the big cats.
Yes, and any kind of animal that lives in the area. But I personally don't think a wall is the right answer. If they're going to do something, I think it should be a ditch, a very deep one that would prevent all the tunneling. Because as long as you have borer machines tunneling under a wall, you're wasting the money to put up a wall.
Yeah, C. Carlos Guzman was his name, the guy who tunneled under the wall in San Diego?
Yeah, and you know how they tunneled under the English Channel for a train.
Yeah.
And so it is really very foolish, in my personal opinion, to put up a wall when anybody can go under it.
Well, the reality, Norma, is that from the founding of our republic our modern republic in 1787, right up until the beginning of the George Herbert Walker Bush administration, there was basically no wall. And we did not have a, quote, illegal immigration problem. We don't have an illegal immigration problem right now, in as much as in the last 10 years, the number of people the net number of people who've come into this country is below zero.
That's the same. That's what we have here in Alabama.
Yeah.
Whatever Hispanic population we have has decreased dramatically. And if you're going to worry about something, I would worry more about other races coming across the northern border. You can't tell whether or not an Asian person or someone from the Middle East walking back and forth across the border anywhere from British Columbia to Newfoundland is, American or Canadian or from a foreign country. And when you have the lakes there that are not patrolled, and anybody can get in a boat and go from one side of the lake to the other. And a lot of people don't know that a lot of the men bring in a wife this week and bring in a second wife another week into the Muslim communities. And nobody is thinking about what effect that has on the economy when only one wife is considered legitimate and the others go on every federal program there is.
I don't know anything about that, Norma. But
I watched a documentary on that. It was on Link. But
the biggest issue is that the vast majority of people who are in this country, quote, illegally, came in on tourist visas or educational visas or working visas and overstayed their visa.
Yes, there's a man he finally had to become legal. He had been here in the States in Asheville, North Carolina, running a cabinet shop for about 10 years. My son worked for him, and he realized that the guy was illegal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
Canadians.
and I think this is kind of emblematic of what's going on. A friend of my son's was born in Mexico, and he has a green card to be here in the U.S. right now. His kids are actually U.S. citizens, and he and his brothers are buying land in Mexico. They're gonna, I mean, they're making good money here, but they're gonna retire back to Mexico. Enough of this already. And I get it, I get it. And that's what's been happening for the last 10 years. I mean, ever since the recession, basically, is that people have been leaving the United States, not coming. There is no invasion. Donald Trump keeps going, oh, there's an invasion, there's no crisis, there's no invasion. You got some,
Well, I think that he has people who are advising him who are white nationalists only.
Yep.
And their intent is to play Trump like a fiddle and make him get rid of anyone who does not have a white North European
Oh, but Stephen
ancestry.
Miller does not need to play Trump for this. I mean, this goes back to the Klan rallies that Trump's daddy was part of and
Yeah, that's
arrested
true.
for.
Yeah, and so their message lands on very fertile ground.
Yeah.
And but
Absolutely.
It's ridiculous to put up a wall when anybody can go under it.
Yep. By the
Or
way,
around it.
I got I got an email for Christmas from the RNC because I gave $5 to the Trump campaign back 3 years ago, and or Fred Flintstone got this, and it has Donald Trump say, it says Happy Holidays or Merry Christmas, I guess it says from all of us at the White House or whatever, and then down at the bottom you see Donald J. Trump's signature, and then next to that is 2 other scribbles that are identical style. Presumably one's Melania and the other is Barron, his son. And it just reminded me, I think it was Tom Tolles, I might be wrong, it was one of those cartoonists who does this kind of stuff. They took Donald Trump's signature, blew it up, larger, and then drew 2 little dots kind of in the middle of each one of those vertical strikes, and it looks like a whole series of Klan hoods.
Yep.
But apparently his wife and son have the same identical signature to him. It was just totally weird. This Klan hood series of Klan hood signatures. I tweeted it out. Anyhow, Norma, I got to run. Thank you for the call. It's fascinating stuff. Bobby in Lafayette, Indiana. Hey, Bobby, what's up?
Well, I'm just wondering the conversation with the wall fence or whatever they're calling it now.
Yeah, beaded curtain. Now.
Why the conversation don't start with the fact that the reason they're fleeing their countries is the actions that we took back years ago with the banana republics and the Iran-Contra and
during the Reagan administration.
It just don't make no sense to me.
Yeah, we took these countries down. For a fraction of what the wall's going to cost, we could be building democracies in those 3, in Nicaragua, Honduras, and El Salvador.
And have good neighbors.
Yeah, amen. Amen.
It makes no sense.
Yep.
I don't understand it.
You are a wise man, Bobby. Thank you for the call. Very well said. Bill in Sierra Blanca, Texas, listening on 1350 AM. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hi, yes, I was just saying that I'm a rancher here in far west Texas on the Rio Grande, and we own about, I'd say we own at least 6,000 acres. We used to own 100 sections, which is on the river, but we only own 6,000 acres now, and so that's about 6 miles of river frontage. This is private property. I heard you asking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we've opposed this back in 2008 under Michael Chertoff, under the Obama administration when they were building wall. They had an easy time because that was all public lands, I should say federally owned lands with a boundary commission and whatnot here in
2008,
Texas.
by the way, would have been Trump, or it would have been Bush. But back to your story.
Well, no, it was they built the wall under Obama after Bush went out.
No, I know that continued. Yeah. So I'm not defending anybody here, Bill. I was just 2008 was the election year. It wasn't the first year of the next administration. But what's your point?
500 miles, Tom. They built over 500 miles under Obama, and I voted for Obama. I supported him both times. But I'm just saying that members of Congress, when they passed that Secure Fence Act, they didn't count on ranchers, and some of us are conservative. I vote for the person, not the party, Tom. But they didn't count on us opposing this stuff. They're going to, like you said, they're going to have a tough time in court using eminent domain to take our private property under the takings clause.
Yeah, so you've got 6 miles of waterfront on the Rio Grande that Trump wants to put a wall through. He wants to take all of that apparently away from you. We're talking to Bill in Sierra Blanca, Texas. What are you using the river for irrigation or for your cattle or whatever?
Yes, Tom, we have a farm and a ranch. It's about 6,000 acres. So your listeners need to understand when they built a wall, or they call it fencing, whatever, it's still a wall. When they do that, they don't just build it around the river. They're going to build it at least 100 yards away from the river. So that creates like a no man's land where we can't even get through our animals. So it's just like taking a lot of land, plus it would just completely devalue our farm. We wouldn't even really be able to make a living. It's just so, the true loss of that would be the entire farm, and we don't want to sell. It wouldn't just be the property they take. It would end our way of life in farming and ranching. And my grandfather started this, Tom, in 1916.
Wow. So, Bill, how do your neighbors feel about this, particularly the ones who might be Fox News watchers and Trump supporters?
Well, I'll tell you, a lot of them are still opposed to it. This eminent domain is out of control in Texas with the oil and gas for these pipelines by Energy Transfer Partners. They're just taking ranchers' lands, and we're getting sick and tired of being forced to sell our land for pennies on the dollar. We don't want to sell it at all. So this is already rampant with the Texas Railroad Commission here in Texas for oil and gas pipelines to Mexico. There's several big ones here, Trans-Pecos and Comanche Trail, huge ones that are going to Mexico, and they took a lot of land from people for pennies on the dollar, and we're not going to put up with the federal government doing this as well. There's a point where ranchers will say no more.
Wow, don't mess with Texas. Bill, thanks a lot for the call.
Thank you, Tom.
And thanks for listening to the program down there. We'll be right back. It is 46 and a half minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced, right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And sure enough, Donald and Melania are in Iraq. Very interesting. Stick around. And welcome back. Jim in Poway, California. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Doing good. How about you? And happy Kwanzaa.
Thank you.
Kwanzaa. Anyway.
Back at you.
Was I dreaming, or did I really hear Donald Trump say he came to San Diego and went one-on-one with people, and they all said, build that wall for us?
I didn't hear the quote, but it wouldn't surprise me.
I can't believe that he'd even, first of all, come to San Diego and talk to people.
Yeah.
But that's what he said.
Yeah. And you live in San Diego, or do you live near San Diego?
No, I live in San Diego. I actually live in Poway, which is just a few miles from San Diego proper.
Uh-huh. And so how do San Diegans think about Trump and think about the wall?
We have a mix, but it's a fairly liberal city, so there's your answer.
Well, you've got a wall there in south of San Diego between you and Tijuana that went up in the late 80s, early 90s, didn't it?
Security. That's the silly part. People want security, but we don't need a wall to do it.
Right. Well, you've got something on the order of 1 million border crossings a day.
No, it is. I think it's the busiest border crossing in the world, if I remember right.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's huge. But it can be done with drones now.
Yeah.
I mean, I looked at the immigration people, and they were showing a program. They have these mobile drones, and they go on these jeeps, and they go out there. They don't need all this stuff.
Yeah, and an awful lot of
his base isn't going to believe reality, so I'm afraid that's
where
we are today.
It's all about brown people, Jim.
Yeah,
that's the bottom line.
Unfortunately, that's true. Keep up the good work, Tom.
Thanks a lot, Jim. Good to hear from you. From Jim to Jim, this is Jim in Darien Center, New York. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Just a further point on the border between the U.S. and Mexico is that it's mostly based on the flow of the Rio Grande, and that it's an ever-changing flow.
And that's why they have to set the wall back so far from the river?
Yeah, it's impractical.
Yeah. And so we end up taking more and more land from the farmers, like Bill, who called a little bit ago.
Right, and their water resources.
Yeah, yeah, remarkable. Thanks a lot, Jim. Thanks for the call and for your contribution to the conversation. William in Penrose, Colorado. Hey, William, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I had a different subject originally, but on this wall thing, I have a radical idea. Instead of building a wall, let's build a whole lot more border crossing.
Yeah.
Let people come in to do their jobs, give them an ID, make the assimilation process easier.
Yeah, we did that
think it's
during the
more
Eisenhower
difficult.
administration, actually. He had this program called the Bracero program. The problem with it was that it didn't have, I mean, there were multiple problems with it. It was kind of based in a certain bizarre racist perspective. But the biggest problem with it was that the employers were threatening to pull people's Bracero cards if they didn't go along with low wages or sexual exploitation or, you know, actual physical work exploitation. It became a license to harass people, basically, on the part of the employers. And that's got to be done away with, you know.
Well, anyway, the thing that I see is that when people come here, they're either fleeing poverty or running for their lives.
Yep.
And, you know, there was a time when we did the same thing.
Yep.
And I don't know. I'm lost a little bit now because I really had another thing, but that's okay. I enjoy your program. And Jim from New York said one thing that was very astute, I think, is it's very impractical to build a wall that's going to cost billions to build, billions to maintain. And you're right. We have, like, drones that cost $100 to conserve everything. So,
there you go. Yep. William, thank you for the call. And thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be back. It's coming up on 9 minutes before the hour. More of your calls right after this. You know, here at the Thom Hartmann Program, we're creating basically 3 programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Dave in Armstrong Creek, Wisconsin. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom, and happy holidays to you and yours.
Thank you, Dave. And just a heads up, Diane in Hawaii, you're up next. Dave, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I'm going to get away from Trump and the wall for a minute here.
Okay.
I don't know if you, about 2 weeks ago, Amy Goodman did her whole show at in Poland from the climate summit.
Yeah.
And she spent a whole day with a young lady named Greta Thunberg.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you heard the speech that she gave.
I did.
Oh, it was so inspiring to me. Because I'm pretty pessimistic about this whole issue, but, if the younger generation can emulate her and do some of the things that she's talking about, because she pulled no punches as far as telling people what it is. And, she was saying that, you've ignored us too long, and we're not going to take it anymore. And whether you like it or not, we're going to change things. And I'd love to. I know there's a lot of the younger people in the United States probably never got a chance to hear that, but it's too bad. But.
Yeah, we should play some clips from it because it was brilliant. She said one of the things that she said that I thought was real high impact stuff was in 2078, I will be 70 years old, and my children and grandchildren may well ask me, what did you do back in that day? And I want to be able to tell them, I'm doing this from memory, so I'm paraphrasing, but basically she said that she wanted to be able to tell them that she actually did something to deal with climate change, even if everybody else was too cowardly.
Yeah, it was great. I tell you what. If you could do some of that speech sometime, it'd be really great.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, Dave. I appreciate the call. Diane in Lahaina, Hawaii. Lahaina. Yeah, Sean used to live in Hawaii. She was just pronouncing it correctly for me. So what's up, Diane?
I just wanted to mention that actually when the feds raised the rates, so many consecutive times the way that they have been recently.
Mm-hmm.
Since Trump got in, interest rates have gone up a good 2%. Anyway, if you look historically, that precedes nearly every recession that we have.
Yes.
So I actually, in this one case, am agreeing with Trump that they need to back off on raising the rates.
Well, there's two ways to look at it, Diane. If you look at it as everything is normal and raising rates is going to cause a recession, then yes, your logic is perfect. If, on the other hand, you look at it as everything's not normal, and for the last 10 years, the Fed has been juicing the economy with artificially low interest rates, and now they're ending that policy, then the argument would be that what the Dow is doing by dropping, what the economy is doing by slightly contracting, is returning to normal.
I still think quite a lot of people are going to be hurt by it, and so I would vote for a more gradual increase of rates and, return to normalcy, if you would call it that.
I think the Fed is going
as
agrees with you.
opposed to this very rapid return to normalcy, as you would say.
Yeah. I think the normal average, if you were to average everything over the years, is probably, around 4.5%, something like that? I know before every recession.
If you figure in the margins that the banks take, we've already surpassed that. So, any of the people that do have adjustable rate loans, the rates are already above that.
Yeah, they're at or above 5%. And yeah, that is a drag on the economy. Diane, thank you for the call.
I mean, if they keep on their current trend, I believe they're going to put us back into a tailspin economically as a nation.
Yeah. Could be. Diane, thank you very much for the call. And thank you for being with us today. Fascinating day. It's great to be back to work. It's great to be back talking about what's going on in the world and sharing this with you and hearing from you. And looking forward to tomorrow as time rolls on. We'll see how Donald Trump can figure out to put his foot in his mouth in Iraq. He certainly did it in Costa Rica, or he's done it all over the world, actually. Anyhow, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.